Ace Attorney, Phoenix Wright. A pair of names as inseparable as bread and butter. For 7 short years and 3 content-packed games, Capcom had captured international hearts in the Game Boy and DS alike, and turned the legal profession into a series of critically acclaimed and fan-beloved crime-solving adventures. Phoenix Wright, the titular character, was at the heart of it all. Players saw the blue-suited lawyer's growth from a meek beginner in the first game to one whose skills surpassed his mentors by the end of the third, and were treated to an eclectic cast of prosecutors, witnesses, defendants, and criminals, each character sprite and murder plot more ludicrous than the last. Phoenix himself had become such a recognizable figure that he had to star in a 4th game. More on that later. But the development team wanted something new. After 7 long years, change was in the air, and a new trilogy of games would dawn on the international stage, starring a new defense attorney. So, the first game without Phoenix Wright in the name came to store shelves and DS screens all over the world in 2008. So much was changed and so many new trends were born that the game was, and still is, one of the most divisive in the series. Personally, I've gone from loving it on my first experience, to finding its story overly convoluted and its characters rather dull, and back to appreciating the game for a number of reasons that go beyond the basic plot beats. One of the game's strongest points of contention, good or bad, is that its cases are more interconnected than in the series' previous entries, and in that spirit, I've decided to give this retrospective a cohesive narrative. Much like the game's narrative, you might not notice it until later, however. In any case, let's begin Apollo's legal journey with one of the series' greatest tutorial cases, Turnabout Trump. Showdown time! You lose. Ah! Eee! I seem to be in a bit of trouble. Something like that. Dead. Someone hit him. Hard. Me? Please. The cops should be here any minute. I'm in your hands. Should it come to that. Our protagonist, Apollo Justice, immediately brings panic energy to the room, and Christoph Gavin calms it down. Christoph here is Apollo's boss and mentor, but the defendant in this case has requested Apollo to lead his defense in particular. My name is Apollo Justice. If it isn't clear already, I'm a new attorney, and today is my first trial. Not that I'm worried or anything. The defendant has been accused of murder. My boss wants to help him out, of course, and so do I. I mean, there's no way he did it. Not him! No way! The client seems chillest of all, but his cool demeanor doesn't make Apollo any less nervous. Still, the hooded man ensures Apollo that he's the only one who can find him innocent. The trial begins, and Winston Payne reveals himself to be the prosecutor. For the past 3 games, he's been the plaintiff of the opening act, and it seems that he, along with their judge, maintain their presence here. Winston is a pushover, but Apollo's still no less nervous. When the defendant enters the courtroom, we learn that there is a 3rd returning character. This is truly an unfortunate turn of events. I'm sorry we had to meet again under these circumstances. Long time no see, Mr. Wright. For the 2nd time in a row, this game's intro case features its original protagonist, Phoenix Wright, as its defendant. The previous game, Trials and Tribulations, looked into Phoenix's past and his first meeting with his eventual boss, Mia Fey. This time, however, we see a Phoenix far into the future, wearing a sweatshirt instead of a suit coat and playing piano instead of playing detective. Just what could have caused this former ace attorney's fall from grace? Winston explains the case. The crime occurred at the Borscht Bowl Club, the restaurant at which Phoenix works as a pianist. It seems that a bottle of not wine from the restaurant was used as the murder weapon. The victim, named Shoddy Smith, doesn't seem to have any past connection with the defendant, but Winston shows the court a photo of the victim knocked out in front of a table, poker chips and cards strewn about. It seems that Phoenix doesn't just play piano at the restaurant.
As you can see, a game of poker was in progress at the scene of the crime.
Wait a second. Isn't poker gambling? That's a crime in and of itself!
Indeed, it appears a defendant has fallen to become the basest sort of criminal.
Is it true that the defendant was engaged in a game of poker with the victim? Yet it was only that, a game in the purest sense. A competition, Your Honor.
Competition?
Yes, a test of wits, a silent clash of passions. Only the cards, their backs wreathed in blue flame, know its final outcome. Phoenix stays silent as the court briefly debates the morality of his poker playing before being asked to testify about how the game went down. For those unfamiliar with the Ace Attorney games, the main gameplay loop is cross-examination. My weapons, press and present. Find any inconsistencies, any lies in the testimony, and reveal them to the court. That is cross-examination. Learn it, know it, do it. Inconsistencies? Lies? Phoenix Wright? As if! Phoenix Wright would never lie, and it's up to me to prove it! Through Phoenix's first cross-examination, we learn that he's played poker for around 7 years, and has an undefeated record. We also learned that the poker room used to be a black market hideout, with some secrets to it that aren't relevant just yet. Kristoff continues to wax poetic about the blue cards in the room, and Phoenix points out that 2 decks were used on that night, one red and one blue. Phoenix claims not to have touched the murder weapon, but we have our first objection. It turns out the bottle used to kill Shoddy Smith, in fact, does have Phoenix Wright's fingerprints. Worse yet, his prints are upside down, the exact position you'd have to hold a bottle in to kill somebody. Apollo begins to panic, but Kristoff reassures him that all will be okay. He reveals to the judge, and us, that Phoenix went upstairs and was the one who informed the police of the murder. Further showing off his attention to detail, he's able to reason that the prosecution has a witness prepared, and Winston calls her to the stand. The camera reveals a shy-looking girl in a Russian parka, holding a plate with obvious anxiety.
Ahem. Now, the prosecution. Wait a minute. Would the prosecution care to explain the witness's, paraphernalia? Yes. She is a professional, Your Honor. Those are merely the tools of her trade. And that would be? My name is Olga Orly. I am employed as waitress in Boar Sport Club restaurant. Then, why the camera? Of course, it is my pride to serve borscht at his main naming restaurant, but I also perform, how it is said, at their service. I take it one of these other services is taking the customer's pictures. Like for example, this one.
It seems Olga took a picture of Shoddy and Phoenix dining together. Not long after, she reveals that she was indeed in the basement with the victim and the defendant when the murder occurred. Now it's Olga's turn to testify, and our turn to cross-examine her. Olga testifies that Phoenix strangled the victim, but Apollo is quick to point out the bottle is the cause of death. Still, Olga insists that Phoenix reached for Shoddy's neck. She also claims that Shoddy had a locket around his neck that night, but a photo of the victim's wound shows no such locket. Everyone comes to realize what this means, and the judge asks about Phoenix's locket, to which he says it holds a picture of his daughter. Though there are a few contradictions in Olga's testimony, the results of the poker game are still unknown. Olga testifies that the defendant had lost the poker game, and Winston claims that such a loss would make for an easy murder motive. A photo shows each player's chips at the end of the game, which come in 2 sizes of colors. However, upon closer inspection of the picture, Phoenix's chips seem to have been of a higher value than Shoddy's, ergo he had won the game. However, Olga interjects. Now she claims that Phoenix had cheated in the last hand. When pressed, she claims that Shoddy's hand had 3 aces and Phoenix's had 2. But the photo of the chip shows that Shoddy only had 2 aces. 4 aces in play is possible, if a bit unlikely, but she insists that a 5th ace was present in the last hand, and Apollo decides to examine Shoddy's hand in more detail.
Very well. Mr. Payne, if you would. Very well.
Well, time's a-wasting. Get to it, Justice.
Yes, sir!
When examining evidence, be sure to view it from all sides and angles. Try using the buttons to turn it every which way, and X and Y to zoom in and out. That should give you a better perspective on the case.
Okay, let's do this! What? Your Honor, look at this! One of the victim's cards. The back is a different color. That's impossible. But I put that card in right set.
What was that, Miss Orley?
No, yet. I merely said, I have.
Your Honor.
But Mr. Gavin, yes? Tell me, what is the easiest way to cheat at poker? To cheat? I'll tell you. One merely needs a friend, a comrade, shall we say. The dealer. Wait, so you mean... This witness, Ms. Orley. She's the cheater. A professional, I wager. Yes!
Apollo takes his chance to take the offensive, using Olga's slip-up to claim that she was in cahoots with the victim. Not only this, but that such a connection would give her reasonable motive for murder. The judge is about to call the trial for the day, but...
The prosecution will need to make further inquiries.
Objection!
Phoenix refers back to the differently colored card in Shotty's hand, and asks Apollo who could have slipped that card in, and when. Swapping a wrong colored card during the game would be far too obvious a cheat, so the swap clearly happened after the murder. But as for who would have made such a mistake, it wouldn't be reasonable that Phoenix or Olga could have. So, Phoenix raises a distinct possibility that, in addition to the two of them and Shotty Smith, a fourth person visited the crime scene that night. The judge calls a recess, and Kristoff heads to his chambers, leaving Apollo and Phoenix to chat for a bit. Phoenix shows that the picture inside his locket has a red-clad girl in a top hat, supposedly his daughter, and, even more mysteriously, dodges Apollo's next question. When Apollo asks whether he cheated on the night of the murder, Phoenix references his past. We still know little about what happened to him, but it's likely that some sort of dirty trick was at the center of it all. He moves on and points out the importance of perceiving the body language of one's opponents, both in poker and in trials. He points out that Olga, for instance, had a habit of touching her neck when she spoke. He reassures Apollo that he has the power to finish this case, and the recess ends. Halfway through the game's supposed tutorial case, so much intrigue has already been built up. The intro alone is much slower and more cinematic than any from previous games. The opening shot paints, quite literally, the darkness that looms over this game, and we aren't even given a single name or face. It's almost as if the hands shown aren't even from the game at the Borscht Bowl Club. And speaking of hands, just who would have, and who could have, replaced the fifth ace with a blue card? It doesn't seem like it could have been anyone involved with the case, but is there really a possibility that someone else was at the crime scene? And just what happened to Phoenix? Why is his outfit so casual? When the courtroom opens, Olga returns to the witness stand, and Kristoff immediately breaks her.
Yeah, not.
It turns out that Olga was working with Shotty Smith, and that her waitress uniform and Russian accent were simply to cover her real job at the Borscht Bowl Club. For some reason or other, Shotty wanted to smash Phoenix's legendary record. She claims to have planted a card in Phoenix's pocket before the game, and to have dealt 5 aces during the last hand, prompting Shotty to search the defendant. Upon finding the card, Shotty and Olga would have been able to call him out without recourse.
That was the plan!
Kristoff calls her out though. The planted card was never found, and she has no explanation for that. Not to mention the lack of 5 aces on the board, Olga's insistence be damned. She testifies that Shotty searched Phoenix and didn't find the card she planted, after which Phoenix attacked Shotty. Apollo presses her. Phoenix wasn't cheating, so he had no reason to strike.
Well?
Apollo responds to this sensation by pressing her further, and yet again...
I did see it, honest! I saw it when Bright hit him!
Nobody in the room, Apollo included, knows exactly where he's going with this, but he points out Olga's habit of scratching her neck and presents the murder weapon to explain why. But this is weird. Her neck should be fine. After all, the victim in this case is Shotty Smith, and she wasn't hit by a bottle. Olga continues her testimony by saying that Phoenix sat at the table in a daze before the cops arrived, but Apollo's got her now. After all, who was it who called the cops? He presents Phoenix's phone, reminding us all that he in fact did leave the room to call the police.
When he left the room entirely! The man who picked up a bottle and swung it that night wasn't the defendant. It's gone! The card's gone! You lose. Ah! You! Some master of cheating you turned out to be! That's why I couldn't reveal who I really was. If it came out that I was in league with Smith, I'd be a suspect for sure.
Olga still doesn't admit to committing the crime, but Winston has been all but beaten into submission at this point. Kristoff takes the reins and insists that, by process of elimination, Olga is still lying. After all, the only people in the room were Phoenix, Olga, and the victim. Phoenix interjects too, however, and brings up that fourth person possibility. Not only that, He claims that the fourth person, someone who thought that the cards were blue, is standing in this courtroom right now. There's only one person who had talked about the cards being blue, and only blue, before their colors were revealed to the court. As I expected. Your eyes and ears are sharp as your hair. I was right? Christoph Gavin. You were the fourth person that night. Christoph begins by denying this, but Phoenix notes that he's got just as much connection to Shoddy as himself. Christoph tries to stop Phoenix from testifying, but the decision is Apollo's to make as chief counsel, and Apollo decides to hear him out, but he can't even cross-examine his own defendant before he exchanges words with Christoph. You were planning this all along, weren't you, right? Just because you wanted to drag me into your little murder trial. The only thing I want is the truth. As I did back then, and now. I thought my office was doing you a favor when we took on your defense. It appears that I was wrong. Justice. Sir! He's lying, and you're going to expose him. Understood, sir. Phoenix says he had dinner with Christoph before Shoddy arrived, and found Olga's planted card and put it into a bottle. However, the murder weapon has no cards in it. Perhaps a fifth person came and took it out. Oh, and a sixth person could have helped. Still, there isn't much power behind that line of attack. Push him harder, Justice. Break him. It's just you and the witness in the ring. Go for the KO! Phoenix says he left to call the police after Shoddy and Olga's fight, and when he returned, Shoddy was dead. He mentions the wound on Shoddy's forehead, but the photo of the crime shows him wearing a hat. Phoenix now admits that he was the one who put it back on before the police arrived. I believe I was the only one who witnessed his head. Ah, here we go again. Mr. Gavin? Pardon. It just seems that our client is determined to lie his way through the case. Hey, he's still our client, isn't he? I believe that's enough of that. Mr. Gavin? This witness's testimony is more like a travesty. It's riddled with lies. I'm beginning to see how you came to lose your attorney's badge 7 years ago. Well, you certainly have a unique way of treating your clients, Christoph. I never knew. I believe it was you who threw the first stone. According to Phoenix, there was a reason for him to put Shoddy's hat back on, and it had to do with his call to Christoph that night. Christoph, I seem to be in a bit of trouble. What's this? Game not going well? Something like that. That gentleman who challenged you, he turned out to be good? He turned out to be dead. Someone hit him hard. You mean someone cracked that flawless blown china plate? It wasn't you, was it? Me? Please. The cops should be here any minute. I'm in your hands, should it come to that. And yet another problem gets presented. How did Christoph know that the victim was bald? The judge calls a recess before our co-counsel is to testify. Apollo finds himself alone in the lobby until a girl in a top hat arrives. It's the girl from Phoenix's locket, presumably his daughter. She doesn't give her name, but she does give Apollo a piece of evidence. The missing fifth ace! Wait, this blotch of red. Is this blood? When court reconvenes, Christoph immediately tries to dismiss Phoenix's claim, but... Objection! I wouldn't call it inordinate, Mr. Gavin. But Mr. Wright! In order to have seen Mr. Smith's bald head, you would have had to have been there in the hideout, at the time of the crime. In other words, I must be the real killer, is what you're trying to say. This gets Christoph to testify. He says he went to check on the hideout and saw Smith dead, Olga unconscious, and Wright with the bottle, all through a window in the corner of the room. Based on this testimony, Phoenix is clearly the killer. There must have been someone else there at the moment of the crime! Justice, I just said I saw no one, not a soul. But that goes against what Mr. Wright said! Ah yes, this mysterious fourth person. Who would conveniently be the real killer, I suppose. Glad to see we agree, Mr. Gavin. Let me pose a question then. Tell me, what possible reason did the real killer have to swap cards in the victim's hand? And so we present our trump card. I'd like to take a moment to say that this game's writing is one of its greatest strengths, and while I could summarize the following exchange, I can't capture the magic of Phoenix and Christoph's back and forth without letting it play out in full. What? This is insane! Why wasn't I told about this? Why? Could this be? Could this be the missing fifth ace? Inconceivable! How could you? What are you doing with that card? Well, that's the thing. Why is Mr. Gavin so upset? It's just a fishy card from some fishy girl. Oh, that card? It's mine. That is, I picked it up at the Borscht Bowl Club that night after the murder had occurred. I gave it to my daughter. Cards are her stock and trade, after all.
Objection!
No! Impossible! Unacceptable! The court can't accept this evidence. It's a fraud! A fraud? How can you be so sure? What? I would think the only person who could claim it was a fraud would be the one who took the real car from the crime scene. The real killer. Allow me to elaborate. What if this trace of blood was the reason? The reason for the killer to take the card from the scene of the crime. Where are you going with this? Take another look at the photo, and at the victim's head. At the moment of the crime, his hat fell to the floor, and a trickle of blood ran from his forehead down the back of his head. Couldn't a drop of that blood have fallen on one of the cards? I suppose. The killer then took the card to hide the blood.
Objection!
Regardless, that evidence is non-permissible. Oh. Right. Regardless of how you wasted the last 7 years, you used to be a lawyer. You know what a serious crime it is to conceal evidence. Oh, we can discuss the finer points of our legal system later. What's important now is that I've answered your question. What are you talking about? You wanted to know whether the killer would have taken a card from the crime scene. And now I've told you. That one drop of blood would have been decisive evidence, you see.
Objection!
This is baseless conjecture! Baseless!
Objection!
Oh, I assure you, it's quite based! Well, what? It's amazing, really. How a single drop of blood on a single card can lead us to the truth. It's quite simple. Well, Apollo? Yes? Try picturing the scene of the crime in your head. After that amazing scene, we begin to show exactly why that bloody ace is so important. The photo of the crime shows Shadi facing the table, but if the victim was knocked back by the bottom, there's no way any blood could have landed on the ace. So, Shadi was facing the wall. But, now it doesn't make sense that the killer, i.e. Phoenix, could have attacked him from the other side of the table. So we move the killer to the room's back wall, which is occupied by a cupboard. But, Phoenix asks, what if the cupboard wasn't there at the time of the crime? He and the judge ask a bailiff to examine the cupboard as well as a mysterious second object. For now, we assume that the cupboard is movable, and it slides right in front of that corner window Kristoff was so adamant about being a witness through. With that window blocked, Kristoff had no way of seeing the crime without being in the room himself. Apollo explains what really happened that night. Smith knocked Olga out, and Phoenix went upstairs. Kristoff entered the room, Shadi turned to face him, and Kristoff made his move. He noticed the bloody ace and realized how it would spell his doom, so he replaced it with a card that happened to be blue. Kristoff is a skilled attorney though, and he fights back to the end. He brings up Phoenix's upside-down prints from Apollo's very first objection. However, one of the photos Olga took saves Phoenix's case. While sitting down with the bottle on the floor, it's natural to pick it up from the neck, inverted no less. Kristoff must have changed the murder weapon with one of the bottles near Phoenix's piano. Kristoff still isn't done though. He asks for proof that the bottles are swapped, and fortunately, the second object Phoenix had checked out was another bottle. One with the 5 of hearts, confirming both his and Phoenix's testimony. And the only one who could have done that was the 4th person in the club that night. You, Mr. Kristoff Gavin. Is this your idea of revenge, Phoenix Wright? Revenge? Revenge for the events that took away your attorney's badge 7 years ago? My past is like my logic, straight and true. Nothing's changed. All I did was point the finger of justice in the proper direction. Fine. I'm glad we could have this little tete-a-tete, right? Phoenix explains that the only place to corner a killer like Kristoff was in court, and he warns that he'll need Apollo's help in the dark times to come. With an ominous premonition out of the way, the judge announces his verdict. Not guilty! As celebration, Phoenix makes it clear that he knew of Apollo's power, but has no intention of saying how he knows or how it works. Furthermore, he admits that he took the locket from Shadi. A locket with Phoenix's daughter on it? Just how many more mysteries are going to come up after this case ends? One more, Phoenix's disbarment. In case the seeds haven't sprouted yet, Phoenix lost his badge after a trial 7 years ago, and he even admits to forging evidence in today's trial. The forged evidence is, of course, the bloody ace, whose real copy Kristoff stole. It's enough to make Apollo punch him, not that Phoenix doesn't understand. A punch in the gut for a punch in the gut. And that's how Apollo Justice's first case ends, with more questions than answers. How do Phoenix and Kristoff know each other, and why were they so sarcastic to each other in court? Why did Shadi want to ruin Phoenix's record, and why did Kristoff kill him? Why did Apollo get those weird sensations during Olga's testimony, and how did Phoenix know he would? Why did the victim have a locket showing Phoenix's daughter, and how is Phoenix able to go undefeated at poker for 7 years? And, perhaps most importantly, just what happened 7 years ago? Why exactly isn't Phoenix a lawyer anymore? To briefly explain why this case is great, I'll first mention that Olga is a great tutorial witness, particularly because she's not fully conforming to the tendencies of one. She's, spoiler alert, actually telling the truth sometimes, and the fact that her truth is often found in what sounds the most suspicious or unbelievable really lends to her name. Her not being the killer was a very nice move to make, because again, she's able to lie and tell the truth, and the player doesn't know that until the facts are revealed in the second half. It's all too easy to spend the entire first half of the case suspecting Olga, and it's easy to pick up on the game's hints that she isn't the killer on repeat playthroughs. This case foreshadows itself very well in general, actually. From Kristoff being the killer to the mysteries that surround this case and linger for the rest of the game, a lot is set up and just enough gets resolved to make people want to know more, to know the rest. And again, this is the tutorial case. It's probably better written than the second and third cases in my opinion. The characters' interactions showcase their personalities and relationships, as well as their roles in the case and story at large. Phoenix constantly knows more than he's letting on, and is drip-feeding Apollo knowledge to train him. Winston is as hilariously smug as ever, and woefully pathetic by the back half of this case. Kristoff goes from calm to cranky in a way that's genuine, and you could hear the tension between him and Phoenix, even without my dub. And Olga is a great spin on the tutorial witness, as I just mentioned. It raises expectations higher than a stack of noodle bowls for the second case, but as for whether Turnabout Corner reaches them, the only way to know is to proceed on. As long as we draw breath, the wheel of fate turns. Spinning big crimes and little crimes together. And when the wheel stops, you die. After his former boss got convicted, Apollo Justice finds himself with no other option than to approach the man who gave him forged evidence. Or the girl. Phoenix Wright's law office is now run by the former attorney's daughter, or at least that's what she tells Apollo. Her name is Trucy Wright and she's a magician, in case her blue diamond outfit didn't make that clear at first glance. The Wright Anything Agency, as it's now called, only has 2 employees, both from the same family line. Trucy reveals that she's only 18 years younger than Phoenix, which, among other issues, leaves the mystery of why she never showed up in the original trilogy of games. How and when exactly she came to be part of Phoenix's life shall be left for later. Speaking of Phoenix, he's been in the hospital all day, and the two decide to pay him a visit. Phoenix gets up from his bed to talk, as if he wasn't just hit by a car. Phoenix tells Apollo that his agency has a client for him to represent, Phoenix himself. This time, rather than the defendant, he's the victim. Phoenix wants Apollo to find who crashed their car into him, half-jokingly. He does want Apollo to investigate yesterday's hit and run, but mentions that there's a second, external client back at the office. Apollo Justice's character design is among its greatest strengths, and I'm going to mention it again and again. Look at this guy's noodle hair. Emphasis on Guy, as that's his name. Guy Eldoon, that is. And of course, he doesn't need a defense attorney. Guy is the owner of a noodle stand and a harmonica, but he's lost the noodle stand now. Supposedly he left it alone last night and it was gone by the morning. Adding to the chaos, it turns out that Trucy herself has had a precious item stolen, one of her precious magical props, which I intend to avoid naming for the entirety of this case. She left said prop outside and the thief ran by almost immediately. Trucy gave chase but wasn't able to catch the thief or recover the item. Less than 16 minutes into the case, and we have 3 crimes, not one of them murder! Apollo and Trucy decide to investigate the scene of the crash, and find themselves in front of an ornate mansion. A woman with the dress of an empress and the stare of a vengeful goddess makes herself known as Plum Kataki, of the Kataki family. As the name suggests... Oh, little girl, you should know, we're gangsters. Oh, that means you're the bad guys. Trucy, through me, please, I'm begging you here! Plum explains what she saw of the accident. Around 9 p.m., the car crashed into Phoenix in a paint bucket, hence her cleaning outside. She threw some trash in the garbage can beside the nearby park, but a strange and hurried girl appears briefly before Apollo and Trucy can investigate it. When they do, they find a pair of slippers and a side view mirror, the latter of which probably got knocked off when it hit Phoenix. The two try to enter the park, but the police won't let them in. Among said police is the girl in familiar to some pink glasses and a lab coat, but she certainly doesn't recognize the two investigators. They ask Plum why the park is blocked off, and finally, it's because of a murder! Plum also mentions that a precious item of hers was stolen, one that looks similar to Trucy's magic prop. The hurried girl from just before enters the Kitaki mansion, and Trucy hands her a flyer for the Write Anything agency before she vanishes into the stronghold. Apollo and Trucy arrive at Guy's noodle shop, or where it would be if he still had his stand. Yet another police car is parked next door in front of the Maractus clinic, where Trucy claims the thief escaped to. Guy explains his crime a bit more. He parked his stand outside before 10 p.m. last night, and it was gone by sunrise. When asked about the clinic, he shows just a bit of sarcasm toward its doctor, and says the police arrived this morning. Trucy leads Apollo into the clinic's garage, home to a green car with a pink phone between its wheels. They pick up the phone and even find Trucy's magic prop inside the car's tailpipe. No sign of the thief though. The car's side view mirror is also broken. This fits all too well with the mirror from the park. The car that hit Phoenix seems to be Maractus's. Apollo and Trucy report back to Phoenix, who sheds a bit more light on Maractus. He supposedly has ties to the Kitaki family. Of course, he has no time to discuss payment. The two return to the office, where the delicate girl from before shows up. Her name is Alita Tiala, and she's finally come to ask for a defense attorney. Her fiancé, Waki Kitaki, has been charged with murdering someone at the park. She gives Apollo a letter of request, and they go back to the park. Before they're led to the park, they cross paths with someone eerily familiar. Whatever his deal is, he escorts them to the crime scene, refuses to elaborate, and leaves. The lab-coated officer attempts to shoo them, but reviews their letter of request and allows them to stay. She gives them her name, Emma Sky, and begins to chew even louder than Apollo can talk. At least they found the noodle stand, which was supposedly being pulled by the murder victim. They report to Phoenix again, who engages in further sarcasm with Apollo. He does seem to recognize both the police officer and the not Kristoff, Gavin. The latter's name is Clavier, and he tells us to pick up a gift for the former at his office, a bottle of mysterious white powder. Giving the powder to Emma gets her interested. She seems to know Phoenix, but not his daughter. The powder is used for dusting fingerprints, and she had used it while working on a case with him. The victim is Pal Maractus, and a witness apparently saw Waki and the victim last night. It stands to reason that Dr. Maractus was the one who stole the stand, but there's no explanation as to why. A small knife, also known as a shiv, is sticking out of the ground, and Emma jumps at the chance to analyze it for fingerprints. In case you haven't played the previous games, Emma Sky comes from the very first Phoenix Strike title, or rather the DS port thereof. The game's fifth case was made in part to entice Japanese fans, who played it on the Game Boy Advance, to buy the game again, and it uses the DS's touchscreen for investigation minigames such as solving jigsaws and reviewing video evidence. Emma was, and still is, a plot device in a sense. She provides a very convenient excuse to involve these minigames. Blowing on the DS's microphone and using its touchscreen is a lot more fun, involved, and realistic than pressing buttons in the remakes, but it's not the end of the world. These minigames only take a minute or so after all. In any case, the prints on the shiv match Waki's, and Emma couldn't be happier. Investigating the trash can reveals, I'll say, a look-alike to Trucy's magic prop, likely the item Plum had stolen last night. Apollo and Trucy go to the detention center, but so much has happened today that there's no time to ask the defendant any questions, and so the chapter ends. The beginning of this case is a great show of Apollo Justice's strengths, the game, not the character. The murder doesn't get revealed for the first half of this chapter, and so many other things get thrown at you that you'd be forgiven for assuming there isn't even going to be a murder. The pretense gets dropped just a bit too early. The stolen turnabout from the previous game does a better job at luring you in, I think. But it's still a nice change of pace to learn about and solve a couple other crimes, even if for just half an hour. There are also a few instances of humorous writing and great character design. You can just tell from their sprites and animations that Alita is meant to be an angelic figure, while Guy and Plum have emotions that they're struggling to hide. Unlike Turnabout Trump, however, the case's complexity does leave room for a few missteps in my opinion. For one, so much gets thrown at you that you don't really have all that much time to bask in the pre-murder plot. You probably spend around 20 minutes learning of all the smaller crimes that have been committed, and Plum's mentioning of the murder should make it obvious that it'll become the main focus of this case once you're allowed to investigate that. In addition, the game begins a worrying trend of being unable to talk to your client before the trial begins. You might have noticed that very little information about the murder came to light, and that's going to remain true with the game's next two cases. This, I believe, is done to make the first trial days more exciting, as more revelations occur during this game's trials, and to pack more intrigue into each case's second investigation day. However, this makes early investigation sequences seem unimportant, bordering on unengaging. Fortunately, the game's characterization and aesthetics pull through and carry these sequences like a dead man stealing a noodle stand. Like a good roll of ramen, the ingredients just need time to simmer and mix, and hopefully Apollo is able to cook up a good defense in court tomorrow. Apollo's second trial is about to begin, and he hasn't gotten a word in with his client yet. However, what little Walkie does say isn't very reassuring. For some reason, he says he's fine with the guilty verdict, not that his father approves. Talk or not, it's time for the trial. The camera pans to Christoph Gavin's brother Clavier, revealing that he's the prosecutor for this case. The judge seems to have a melancholy history with him, mentioning that a certain trial saw him vanish from the court for a while, but Clavier assures everyone that he's here to party.
That's no way to get the crowd jumping here, Judge. They're not supposed to jump. This is a courtroom. Achtung, baby! Today we play it my way. What's that noise?
I'd like to say that Clavier's a great change of pace for our game's prosecutors. Miles Edgeworth and Franziska von Karma were obsessed with perfection, while Franziska and Godot each had a vendetta against Phoenix, leading them all to be rather stuck up and serious. Clavier flips that assumption on its head immediately here, and as the story continues, it'll only be more and more clear how different his attitude is from the series' other prosecutors. Still, Clavier is a prosecutor, and he moves to call the defendant himself to testify about his motive. Walkie takes the stand and explains that he went to the Maractus clinic after a shootout with a rival gang. Walkie has had a bullet close to his heart for 6 months now, but Maractus didn't tell him. The family only found out during a recent health checkup. With the motive established, Clavier calls Wesley Stickler to the stand, a university student who happens to be at the park to see Walkie's confrontation, and whom Trucy seems to vaguely remember. He claims to have seen two men standing directly opposed to each other from the south side of the park, one shooting the other square in the forehead. However, Apollo has his first objection. The bullet went through Maractus' right temple. Clavier sets things back on track though, suggesting that Wesley could have shot on instinct, causing Maractus to turn just in time to get shot in the temple. Wesley says that he did indeed shout, after which the shooter tossed his gun aside. However, the pistol found at the scene of the crime has no fingerprints, and the shiv does. There is a possibility, therefore, that someone else had used the pistol. Apollo's objections do prove, however, that Walkie was in the park and wanted to choose violence that night. Clavier makes sure everyone knows this, and Wesley insists that no one else was there. Apollo tries to press every statement, but either nothing comes out of his questioning, or Clavier is able to silence any doubt. Apollo's just about to give up when... Eeeeee!
To Trucy! Nobody move! Well, what's the meaning of this? Who are you? There'll be no verdict in this court. Not yet. Wait, are you one of the Katakis? The Katakis? You mean the notorious gangsters? If you don't want to see me give the pretty little girl a new smile, do as I say. Adjourn the court for 20 minutes. Well, what? That this court will not bow to pressure from the likes of... Judge. I see little point in further aggravating this gentleman. Recess, 20 minutes, or I promise you'll regret it. Wait! How did he disappear so fast? Come to the defendant lobby, Apollo. I suppose I have no choice but to adjourn for a 20-minute recess. Bailiff, catch that mysterious man.
Apollo rushes into the defendant lobby and finds that Trucy is perfectly fine. In fact, the hitman who had a knife to her was actually...
Ah! What the heck is that?
It turns out that Mr. Hat here is among her signature tricks, and it's not the only one she shows Apollo during the recess. She tells him that she can perceive Wesley's uncertainty, much like how Apollo was able to tell when Ogle was lying in the last case. She explains that, each time he lied, he'd squeeze his book a bit, much like a stress ball. Not just Wesley. Phoenix brought her to play poker with him from time to time, and she'd give him signals about his opponents. Apollo continues to doubt her, but Trucy assures him that they'll be fine. Apollo asks to cross-examine Wesley once again, this time armed with the knowledge of his nervous tic. After hearing the testimony, Apollo's bracelet squeezes his arm to signal that this testimony is indeed suspicious. Trucy reminds him of his book-turning habit, and all he has to do is wait for Wesley to get nervous. As soon as Wesley mentions that he used a cell phone, Apollo senses his jitter and calls him out. He asks to see the phone, making the witness even more frantic, before pulling it out to prove that he dropped it at the victim's garage. Wesley actually used a public payphone, and Apollo argues that, "You broke into the Maractus Clinic garage on the night of the murder!" This cell phone tells all! Apollo has proof that it was dropped that night in particular. The victim's car would have rolled over the phone if it drove, and the side view mirror that hit Phoenix proves that it was parked there that night. It looks like Wesley's about to be indicted for the murder of Dr. Maractus, but there seems to be no connection between the two. Wesley insists that he saw the crime scene clearly, and Apollo's lie detector bracelet doesn't react. He asks about the noodle stand, and Wesley notes that it said noodle from where he stood. Apollo realizes the contradiction. From the south side of the park, the sign says Eldunes. The sign does say noodle if it's read from the north side. But if Dr. Maractus faced northward to meet Wesley's shout, Waki couldn't have shot him in the right temple, and Wesley could have! Still, there's no connection between Wesley and Maractus, and there is another reason that could lead to his lie. The investigation did turn up Trucy's magic prop and a lookalike from Plum Kataki, the latter of which was found in a trash can on the north side of the park, and the former found inside Dr. Maractus' car. Wesley Stickler was the one who stole Trucy's magic prop, and as a university student, it was also he could understand the magic behind its tricks. Wonky was proven to be at the scene, but the testimony points to him not being able to kill the victim. An intriguing midpoint for an intriguing case. Wesley, much like Olga, has a convincing non-murderous reason to lie, with a few unintentional inaccuracies such as the gun versus Shiv testimony that show the player that not every witness is even lying on purpose. However, I do think Olga is handled far better than Wesley. Her existence feels much more necessary and influential to Turnabout Trump than Wesley's, whose thievery could be cut entirely from this case. Frankly, I find him and the subject matter of his thefts to be disgusting, regardless of the comedy that it's all meant to invoke. For more context on what exactly he stole, you can watch my dub. A link to the playlist is in the description and comments. On the topic of this case's numerous mysteries, most of them have been resolved now. Dr. Maractus hit Phoenix, and then Wesley dropped his phone in the garage after stealing Trucy's magic prop, and Maractus stole Guy's noodle stand, but the reason is unclear, and it's even less clear who did, or who could have, shot the victim. It is nice to see how these crimes connect, and they'll stir themselves together even more by the end of the case. For now, though, things are still as murky as a seasoned bowl of noodles, and yes, I will make noodle puns for the rest of this case. Alita comes by the office to congratulate Apollo on a job well done today, and they and Trucy decide to talk a bit. She mentions that she met Waki at her old job, and that his father, Winfred, has been trying to make more white market money, but she won't elaborate. He still can't talk to Waki at the detention center, but Wesley's available for questioning, not that either party is happy to see the other. He affirms once more that he saw the victim and defendant from the north side of the park, and that is all. Plum also congratulates Apollo on finding the thief, and confirms that the family is after clean money. About Alita, she isn't too pleased. Plum's been suspicious of her since Waki first brought her home. Apollo and Trucy take the slippers from the trash can, and notice on them a leaf-outlined paint marking and an undecipherable toe print. The pair head back to Guy Eldune's house, and while he's glad his stand's been found, he can't hide his irritation that he can't have it back just yet. Or his irritation at Dr. Maractus for taking it. Guy mentions that Maractus had given the Katakis free operations now and then, and the source of his animosity reveals himself. The master chef used to be a master surgeon. The police still won't let Apollo into the clinic unless he can prove that it's related to the murder. The clinic being the victims somehow isn't enough, but at least they can finally talk to Waki. He doesn't provide much new information, sadly. He won't give up how he and Alita met, and doesn't even remember whether he shot Maractus. They head back to the park, where Gavin's motorcycle has gone bad thanks to a clogged exhaust pipe. They return to the crime scene, where Emma makes plain her frustration with the footprint analysis kit, and a disdain for Clavier's fame. More than that, she holds a grudge against Clavier for apparently taking away Phoenix's attorney's badge. Thanks to the relations involved, she asks for Apollo's help in analyzing the park's footprints from the night of the crime. Waki's and Wesley's footprints confirm what was revealed in the trial, but there's also a single flat print with a leaf motif facing away from the noodle stand. Apollo presents the clinic slippers, and the defense team finally has some evidence linking the clinic to the murder. Before the clinic, a quick detour to ask Phoenix about his past. He mentions that a certain magnificent figure had been killed, and that a 17-year-old had defeated him in the trial. Apollo presses him though. The reports claimed that Phoenix had forged evidence back then, and Apollo knows he did during the Shoddy Smith case. It seems that's all he'll get out of the former ace attorney for now. A pair of blue and beige sandals is scattered in the lobby, and the toe print on them looks familiar, but without any time to think, a bump comes from the office, and the two venture deeper into the clinic. The window's busted and the floor is a mess. They find a broken lamp with a bright red spot and a half-open safe, the latter of which has a bullet and a medical chart on Waki, signed by the victim, and Alita Tiala. Emma confirms that the shoes' toe prints match each other, and Waki confirms that the sandals are Alita's. He also, finally, admits that he met Alita at the Maractus clinic. Things are starting to come together. After Waki's shootout, the Katakis rush to the Maractus clinic, hoping that their family doctor would be able to save him. Maractus didn't have the guts to tell the Mafia that he couldn't fix their son, and they only found out once they'd gotten a checkup. A very, very clear motive to kill. However, there is someone else, someone who shared Maractus' secret, and she'll be testifying in court tomorrow. Though this case started as a series of silly, petty crimes, it has shifted focus to a darker, much more somber murder plot. Maractus is dead, and Waki is about to be dead. Guy Eldoon reveals that he's lost his passion, and it's clear that the Kitaki family are likely to lose their only son. Guy doesn't have a single happy expression, all serious, all melancholy. Plum's boisterous laugh and Waki's twirling grin hide all too weakly the pain that they feel on the inside and the despair creeping closer to their hearts. The only mystery left unsolved is Alita Tiala. She knew of Waki's condition, but threw herself onto him regardless. What is her pain? What do her sweet smile and heavenly figure hide? Apollo got 2 hours of sleep last night. Statistically, this is twice as much as the average lawyer in real life. Clavier calls Alita Tiala to the stand, who supposedly heard the defendant, her fiancé's, murder plans. She claims that he took a pistol the moment he heard about Maractus' lie. Apollo immediately suspects Alita, since she knew of his plans. It sounds ludicrous, but Apollo suggests that she had a reason beyond wanting to help out Waki, and shows the medical chart she worked on with Maractus. Alita sharply denies this point, saying she stopped her hospital work half a year ago. She was still connected through Waki though, and more directly, her sandals happened to be in the clinic's lobby during the investigation. Alita admits that she went, but says it was to warn Maractus about Waki. Apollo brings up the medical chart again. Maractus had locked it inside a safe, and it was a secret between the two of them alone. If Waki knew she'd lied to him too, it would have been bad news. Apollo's bracelet reacts, and while Trucy can't sense anything, he can. Alita protests that she had no reason to see Maractus after so long, but time is of the essence to her. The recent checkup is exactly why she had to make a move immediately. A full half year had passed since the operation. You thought you were home free. When the chart came back to haunt you. Yikes! Alita admits again that she was afraid the Kitakis would find out. She insists that nothing else happened between her and the victim, but Apollo shows the bullet from inside the safe, whose markings match the murder weapons. Apollo presents a theory, that Alita intended to marry Waki, knowing he would die. Waki rushes to protect her name, but Alita's done pretending. She was indeed after Waki's money. Clavier retorts Apollo's argument. If Alita was after Maractus' medical chart, she should have taken it from the safe. She testifies that she did try to get the chart later on, but scattered when Apollo entered the clinic yesterday. Apollo and Clavier go over the last trial, and how Wesley's testimony proved Waki couldn't have shot him. Alita and Clavier ask Apollo, however, where the bullet could have come from, given that Maractus was shot in the right temple. Like in Turnabout Trump's killer placing, the key is to forget all other context and use the facts. The truth will reveal itself in time. For now, the only possible location for the shooter is the noodle stand. Wesley was facing north, and the victim turned his head. His right temple faced east, and the noodle stand was right there. It sounds ludicrous, but there was a print leaving the noodle stand from the Maractus Clinic slippers, bearing Alita's toe prints. In addition, the clinic's lobby held a stand's worth of bowls, leaving more than enough space for a human to be shoved inside. Alita testifies again, and Apollo's bracelet reacts again. She keeps grabbing her neck, and much like the last person to do so, Apollo presents the lamp as proof that she's been injured. The victim in this clinic that night was this witness. Specifically, you tried to threaten Dr. Maractus, and he attacked you! That's what happened that night at the Maractus clinic! Alita went to the clinic's office that night, demanding the medical report, but Maractus knew that he had nothing to lose, and she did. He ended up attacking her and choked her unconscious. Still, there's no hard proof of anything she did after that. The judge is about to send her off, but Clavier asks Apollo to press on. Alita didn't climb into the noodle stand on her own. Maractus was the one who stole that stand, and he was the one who forced Alita into it, thinking that she was already dead. He ran into Waki by chance. He went to People Park to dispose of the body in the river. But Alita woke up, and Wesley shouted, giving her the chance she needed to shoot in the chaos. Alita and Clavier provide one last obstacle, Maractus' car. Trucy argues that it couldn't run last night, but it was operable enough to hit Phoenix right. But the final piece of evidence ties all the crimes together. After hitting Phoenix, Maractus parked his car. The broken side view mirror proves this. Later that night, Wesley dropped his phone between the car's tires and shoved Trucy's magic prop in the tailpipe. This brings the truth to light. The clogged tailpipe prevented the car from running. Waki found out about the checkup and told Alita, who went to the clinic and got strangled. Without any other option, Maractus stole Guy's noodle stand, and in went Alita. Waki enacted his plan, Wesley was on the run, and Maractus was trying to get rid of his victim. Scared and alone, through crimes she and others had committed for half a year, Alita took her shot and fled. The Katakis found a single doctor that can help Waki. Finally, for at least someone in this case, there is hope. And there's hope for Apollo too. He's becoming a better attorney and slowly forming into his own character. But his hand is very much being held on both counts. Trucy did more work than him to get this trial's not guilty verdict, and Clavier was more helpful than Miles in Turnabout Samurai. Apollo's shaky self-confidence and earnest seriousness about the wacky situations of the Ace Attorney world are reminiscent of Hajime Hinata from Danganronpa 2, a game that relies heavily on its predecessor. Apollo's bracelet is a parallel to Phoenix's Magatama, which I'll explain more when the time is right. Apollo and Phoenix both lose their mentor just a quarter into their respective first games, and Trucy is an obvious parallel to Phoenix's former assistant Maya Fey, though her more traditional magic tricks don't even give Apollo much to marvel at and come to terms with, unlike Phoenix being exposed to, and even using, the concept of spirit channeling. This case does build up a bit more intrigue, but even this has some caveats. People complain a lot about Phoenix being shoehorned into the game, and while it makes for some great interactions in Turnabout Trump, fans have worried since 2007 that his presence overtakes Apollo's. Apollo's bracelet is his to use in court, but Phoenix seems to know more about it before he did. The investigation starts with Phoenix getting hit by a car, and a decent amount of it is spent learning about the trial he was in, and the fact that he knows Clavier as well as Christoph Gavin. There is an air that Phoenix is a more important character than Apollo in his own game. Fortunately for fans of Apollo, the next case barely features the previous trilogy's namesake, and gives Apollo and Clavier much more time to bond together. He and Trucy are to attend one of his concerts after all.
We love you! Rock on, everyone! This party's not over yet. Get out your handkerchiefs for our special guest! That's right, baby. The night's just getting started.
Thank you for coming to the Gaviner's Guilty as Charged tour. This ends the first part of tonight's show. There will now be a 20-minute intermission. Trucy is far more excited than Apollo to have been invited to one of Clavier's concerts. Right off the bat, I'll state that I enjoy the idea of focusing on Apollo, Trucy, and Clavier. They're going to bounce off each other a lot in this case, and their relationships are fun, realistic, and humorous. Apollo is much more down-to-earth, Trucy is whimsical and happy-go-lucky, and Clavier is cool and stylish. Apollo engages in sarcasm with the two of them, and most of the other characters in this game, and Clavier's smirk and Trucy's smile tend to persist no matter whom they're talking to. On the subject of Clavier, I decided to give him a more regular accent, closer to my real voice, during this case's investigation. It's canonical that he studied in Germany, but isn't German himself, so I headcanon that he plays this accent up on stage and in court, but doesn't strain himself around friends. Again, the cast of this game is eclectic enough to allow for such headcanons. That's one of this game's greatest strengths. And speaking of cast, we're quickly introduced to three new characters, Romain Latouche, Lamiror, and Maki Tobai. Lamiror is a beautiful foreign songstress whose primary language is Virginian, and whose calm voice and music Apollo actually enjoy. Romain is her agent and interpreter, and Maki is her pianist, a fellow Virginian who can't speak English or see, hence the sunglasses. Lamiror acts as the boy's eyes, and paints her sights into beautiful songs. And one of those songs is about to begin, a collaboration between Clavier and Lamiror. I'm only going to play it once in this review, but players will not be so lucky. Much like Rise from the Ashes' Blue Badger video, the Guitar Serenade is an unskippable cutscene that is played numerous times to highlight different aspects of the song. I'll tell you the number of times the following video is shown throughout the case, starting with 1. Sugar, sugar, oh that night in your embrace, when you stole away the keys, my heart held on to so tight. Pleasure, but a fleeting melody. It around me, and now through the air I fly. Whoa, whoa, burning on in my heart fire. Burn my love away, all away, like a bullet of love fire. Take my life away, all away. Guitar, guitar, up together to the sky. Thank you, thank you. Links will be in the description if you want to watch every single failed attempt of mine to sing it live. The clip you just watched is from a standalone recording, which will also be applied to the dub for more professionalism, so you'll have to watch the outtakes on their own. While you're there, I might as well ask you to subscribe and join my Discord server. The server's pretty dead right now, but I'd love to be able to discuss these videos with people more. I do aim to entertain after all. The guitar burning on stage seems not to have been part of the plan. He's more upset about the concert than losing to Apollo, hammering home that he really doesn't care about a perfect win record. Back to what's important to Clavier, the third act is about to start, and Apollo decides to stay backstage while Trucy watches. Emma also shows up, another fast friend of Apollo's, much more happy to see him than to be working security. The two decide to chat. What was that? Was that a gunshot? Something's going on. You, out of my way! Emma! Lammeror! It's not locked. I'm going in. What's that awful noise? Oh, it's the concert. It's Lammeror's manager, Mr. What's his name? Latouche. Oh no. Hey, you. Me? Watch this room for me. I have to call for backup. Right, understood. You want me to make sure no one comes in, right? And don't touch anything. I'll be right back. What's going on? I just talked to him and now... He's alive! Mr. Latouche, can you hear me? Shot. I was shot. Who shot you? I don't know. Ask what? Ask witness. Witness. There was a witness. Who? Cold. So cold. Witness. You're cold. Don't worry. You're going to be fine. Help is on the way. Can't see. Hang in there, Mr. Latouche. Tell me, who was the witness? The witness is Siren. It's a siren. How could a siren witness anything? Mr. Latouche! Yeah, Emma! What was that? Who's there? What's wrong? Emma, did you see anyone just now? No. I could have sworn I heard a door close. The concert's been canceled. Backup's on its way. Is Mr. Latouche? He's dead, isn't he? That's terrible. I lost him. By the way, the victim's last words will also be shown many times during this case. I will be keeping a counter for that as well. Ace Attorney is notorious for its copious flashbacks, and this case might have the most in the series. Yet another character shows up and leaves just as quickly before Clavier tells everyone in the hall not to discuss the murder with anyone, even Lammeror. Apollo reminds himself of the victim's last words before entering Lammeror's room. Emma lets them investigate and they discuss what happened with Trucy. The murder weapon seems to be a huge revolver, too big for even police officers, and a familiar brooch lies on the floor. Romaine's left hand holds a heart-shaped keyring, perhaps the killer's. Apollo and Emma found the room empty apart from the victim's body, and there aren't a lot of places to hide or escape from. apart from a small air vent on the ceiling. Emma leaves the room, and Trucy continues him to follow suit. A yellow suit similar to Trucy's adorns yet another mystery man, who doesn't say even a word to them as they pass in the hall. The two arrive on stage to see Clavier and the Shark Man from earlier, Darien Crescend, arguing about a misplaced note during their latest performance. Darien is a guitarist, too, and a detective. Now Clavier seems to care more about his concert than the current case, and asks Apollo to perform a touchscreen minigame and find whose instrument was played wrong tonight. Despite Apollo's protests and the seeming lack of relevance to the case, I find that this minigame is just a bit less shoehorned into the case than Emma's. Personal tangent, I love music making tools like this, and wish the remake sound test let you play with all the songs in the trilogy. In any case, Apollo finds that Darien was the one who missed a note, and Clavier is vindicated and vindictive. Apollo shows the keyring to Clavier, who claims that it's his. Of course, Apollo breaks the news that it was found in the victim's hand. Trucy presses Clavier to go into detail about today's burdens. His keyring was stolen, so he had to call a taxi and force his guitar case open. The guitar didn't last much longer than the case, of course. Everyone watched it blow up on stage. And finally, Romain Letouce died. Trucy finds these events familiar. They follow the lines of the guitar's Serenade. Darien leaves to contact the Virginian embassy, and Clavier would like some time to himself, so Apollo and Trucy go to the governor's dressing room now to talk with Lamiror. Surprisingly, she speaks English. Hiding her fluency was Romain's idea, to add to her exoticism. She sends Maki away for some fresh air, and Apollo asks her a few questions. She's not supposed to speak English in public or talk about her past, and Trucy knows that she's known as the Siren of the Ballad. Where have we heard that before? She's been with Maki for a while, but Romain only became her manager 3 months ago, and she knows little about him. After another mention, Apollo catches on that Lamiror is the siren the victim was talking about, and we cut to his last words for the second time. He presses Lamiror on what she saw, but she declines to say anything to an attorney with no client. They take a postcard of her as the landscape painter in sound, and ask about the brooch they found on the floor. Lamiror confirms that it is hers, and the two leave. Emma bumps into them in the hall, angry at Apollo for leaving the scene. Somehow, Romain Letouce's body has left the dressing room. Clavier's in Lamiror's room too, and he's just as upset. Darien says that his guitar's been stolen too, and everyone splits up to search. Apollo and Trucy notice that the stage's center has arisen like in the guitar Serenade, and decide to climb.
It didn't look that high from below, really. But when we got to the top, I felt every one of those 15 feet down. Of course, I wasn't thinking about the height anymore. Not after what we found up there. Eeeeee! We found 2 things we were looking for, and 1 thing we never expected to find. The body, guitar in hand, and the pianist, Maki Tobai.
The next morning, Clavier visits Apollo and Trucy. He says that people above even him want this case wrapped up quickly, and that Maki Tobai, now the prime suspect, wants Apollo as his attorney. He and Trucy head to the detention center to talk, but that's a little difficult. Yet another trial is about to start before Apollo's gotten a word in with his client. This game in general is phenomenal at establishing an atmosphere with its graphics and sound. As a Pokemon player, it's not something I care about that often, but the DS's capabilities gave the team so much more to work with, and while both the original GBA trilogy and the latter 3 games have been remade, there's still a markable difference between the assets of the games, as this entry has a more technologically advanced base. I bring this up now because, for one, I barely got to talk about the sprites and music in Turnabout Corner, but for two, seems like the guitar's Serenade are allowed to play it on the screen. It was a treat in 2007, and it's still a pleasure now. Lamiror's and Clavier's themes each fit them perfectly, signaling what they're like before they've said a word. When you listen to their themes, Lamiror's is playing right now, that character becomes the focus of the scene. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Clavier's focus on music and the decision to have a case built around one of his concerts were influenced by the capabilities of the Nintendo DS. As for the case itself, a lot happens really quickly. I didn't even realize this section of the review had over 15 paragraphs until I looked just now, and this case ramps up similarly. In a few ways, this case is similar to Turnabout Corner. Several crimes have happened in quick succession, and they all seem rather connected. The non-murder crimes are present to the game's long-standing characters, and the murders themselves happen after several of the characters have been established, though the murder happens much earlier in Turnabout Serenade. As I mentioned, Apollo doesn't get to talk to his client yet, but both cases have given the main characters time to shine. Trucy was greatly involved in Turnabout Corner, and now Clavier's personal side makes itself known. Regardless of how close Apollo and Clavier get, though, they'll have to face off yet again in court tomorrow.
There isn't even time to meet in the defendant's lobby, not that there'd be much chance for conversation. There is time, however, for the judge to ask about what to say to someone in the hospital. Surely that's more relevant to this case.
Apparently, the Chief Justice's son has some sort of incurable disease. In any case, Clavier goes over the basics and submits Romain Latouche's autopsy report and a map showing where the bullets landed. Clavier's argument is simple. Apollo and Emma rushed into the victim's room, but the killer was nowhere in sight. The only way out was through that air vent, and the only person with access small enough to fit through was Maki Dobai. Apollo presses the idea that Maki escaped through the vent, but Emma states that the vent had been opened and that Maki's fingerprints were on it. The judge is just about ready to call a verdict, despite the lack of witnesses.
Prosecutor Gavin, you claim that there were no witnesses to this crime. Are you absolutely sure? Absolutely. I'd swear it on my career as a prosecutor. And on my million-seller hit song, A Troquinine, My Love. There he goes again. That's too bad, because there was a witness. Oh, really now? But how did you come to possess knowledge the prosecution clearly does not? Because I am the only one in the world who knows this.
Of course, we can't call this witness before hearing the victim's last words again. Clavier doubts the defense attorney's hearsay, but Apollo calls the siren Lamoureux to the stand. Really? Again? I'm giving that one a half point. The judge asks Lamoureux where she learned English, and she says she's forgotten. Clavier chimes in, confirming that she has a form of amnesia. Her testimony is very blank. She claims that she didn't see a thing, and that she knows even less about the murder. However, Apollo shows the brooch he found in the crime scene, the one Lamoureux dropped during the concert. Gosh, I love the damage animation. Lamoureux retorts in Virginian. She did go backstage for the briefest of moments, making that bumping sound that Apollo heard. Of course, it's impossible to flash back to that before flashing back to the victim's final words. Apollo asks her to clarify what she saw as she passed by the room, and she claims that the victim was behind a wall. However, Apollo's bracelet reacts. He takes a chance to trip her up, and she laments that he was shot, something she shouldn't know. She hadn't been told, and she said she saw nothing. Just what is Lamoureux hiding? Lamoureux augments her testimony again, now claiming to have seen the bullet holes in the room. However, if she only looked in for the briefest of moments, the door would have covered the bullets completely. So, she testifies again. Now, she claims that she saw an adult confronting Romain through a window. She supposedly remembers the voice well of a man other than the victim. Although it's beneficial to the defense, Apollo calls that Lamoureux is lying, as no man could have fled the crime. Clavier adds that the window at the back of the room was closed, making it impossible for her to see. These inconsistencies give Clavier the edge to cast doubt on her testimony, and Apollo's. Lamoureux is dismissed. Emma returns to testify and reiterates that no unauthorized personnel, children included, were allowed at the scene. However, the judge and Trucy call into question the discovery of Maki and Romain on top of the stage later on. Emma finally gets an Allegra testimony as she talks about his crimes lining up with Lamoureux's lyrics. If Apollo can't prove that something's wrong with his newfound friend's line of reasoning, it really is over for him and Maki. I'll go into detail about Moderato and Allegro testimonies later, but suffice to say there are two testimony themes in each Ace Attorney game, suggesting different levels of intensity to each cross-examination. Emma and other detectives throughout the series typically just lay out the base facts. Is Emma seriously arguing that a blind child was able to take down the mountain of a man in just 2 shots? Apollo quickly argues that the weapon's size would make just about anyone miss, but somehow the only logical conclusion is that he indeed shot the victim. While there are a few intriguing reasons to suspect Maki, such as the air vent and time of death, there are a few pieces of evidence which seem to prove his innocence, or at least make things ambiguous. Several characters have talked about the gun dislocating parts of any shooter's body, and yet everyone thinks that a perfectly healthy child shot it twice? It's a bit much even for Ace Attorney. Speaking of evidence favoring the defendant, Apollo points out the blurry bloodstains near the victim's head, which could have only been smudged by someone who could actually see. Emma and the judge are shocked by this revelation, but Clavier's cool. He responds with what honestly feels like a cop-out at this point. You have to experience the lunacy of this too.
It seems I owe the court an apology. Huh? The Gaviners are a band with law enforcement ties, yet the murder occurred during our concert. Apparently this caused some confusion over jurisdiction. As a result, some reports were not filed in an entirely timely manner. I'm not sure I like the vibe I'm getting here. Hey Apollo, look at him. Why is Prosecutor Gavin all relaxed and smiling like that? Like he knows something we don't, and he's about to tell us. I've got an idea. Let's rock! With these documents,
But before that, I have a question for the Fraulein Detective, if I may. Well, what? Tell me, why do you think that Maki Tobai is blind? Huh? What did he say? What are you saying? Of course he's blind. Of course. He's the blind pianist, right? So he's... Doesn't Lamoureux lead him around by the hand all the time? No way. I have a report here on the defendant, Maki Tobai. According to this, Maki Tobai can see perfectly well. Seriously, after letting Emma testify that the killer was blind, he tells everyone about this? This is updated autopsy report levels of insidious. Not to mention, it barely helps the story along, at least for now. There is some saving grace to this twist, and I do appreciate that the game goes back and forth on how suspicious Maki looks throughout the case, but Maki being blind doesn't fundamentally change the case. Clavier himself said that his argument has nothing to do with Maki being blind, further proving that this twist is just a waste of time. Back to the story at hand, the bloody writing reveals that a number that Clavier recognizes as belonging to an Interpol agent. He asks Darien to run a search on the number Romain wrote, and Clavier moves to ask why Maki could pretend to be blind. Trucy and Apollo figure it out. While Maki can see, Lamoureux can't. Her status as the landscape painter in sound would be shattered if everyone knew she couldn't see. Neither the judge nor Emma believe it, so Clavier asks her to testify once more today. Lamoureux admits that she is indeed blind. Apparently, her tagline as a painter came about before it was known that she was blind, and she's kept it a secret for PR reasons. Apollo asks if the victim knew about her condition, and we flash back yet again to his final words. He's alive! Mr. Latouche, can you hear me? Cold. So cold. Witness. You're cold. Don't worry, you're going to be fine. Help is on the way. Can't see. Hang in there, Mr. Latouche. Tell me, who was the witness? The witness is Siren. He wasn't saying that he couldn't see, but that the witness, that Lamoureux, couldn't see. Despite everything, Lamoureux still claims that she heard the second man's voice, but she's interrupted by the bailiff and Darien, who have the results of their Interpol report. Apparently, the number Romain wrote was his own. Romain Latouche himself was an agent of Interpol, and the murder weapon was his. Wait. Lamoureux, is something the matter? That voice just now. Darien? Mr. Darien, is it? It was him. I am sure of it. It was him? You aren't saying... That voice I heard, talking to Mr. Latouche, when I heard the gunshots fired. It was him. It was Mr. Darien. Is this some kind of a joke? What? No way. The courtroom fell into such a chaotic state the trial had to be suspended temporarily. I'd never seen that happen before. Of course, it's not every day that you get an accusation like that one. Lamoureux fingering Darien Crescend. Not only is he a guitarist, he's a detective. Could it really have been his voice Lamoureux heard? Things were changing fast, and frankly, I wasn't sure I could keep up with it. Hey, no imping out now, Apollo. I'll mostly touch on my opinions concerning Lamoureux here, as I've given my thoughts on the rest of this segment already. Again, having Lamoureux be blind instead of Maki is an interesting twist, and it does nominally give reason for him to pretend that he's unable to see, but it still doesn't do anything to shake up the dynamic of the characters involved. It does make her an inherently less reliable witness in a way that's unique to the series, and I do very much appreciate that she seems to be trying to help Maki. In general, Ace Attorney witnesses tend to be either deliberately or unwittingly obstinate to the defense's success, so Lamoureux trying to defend Maki is a breath of fresh air. Unfortunately, this trial day is very filler-coded. It's more concerned with setting the stage than putting on a show of its own, what with the whole Interpol debacle and Lamoureux claiming to hear Darien's voice at the time of the crime. To be fair, those are two extremely intriguing leads, which will undoubtedly be pursued during the upcoming investigation or trial day, but those two moments are crammed into the last 5 minutes of the trial. Everything else is just window dressing. With the opening act complete, the show is ready to play out at least. Time to see if the main event is as good as advertised. Apollo and Trucy regroup, and neither is sure what to think. Just as much evidence was shown against Maki's case as was shown for, and the trial raised just as many questions as it answered. On the bright side, there are two leads. Lamoureux named Darien as the shooter despite his alibi, and the victim was an Interpol agent. Apollo asks for Phoenix's help, but he's been out on a top-secret mission, says Trucy. As Apollo and Trucy are about to investigate... Trucy, was that another one of your tricks? It wasn't me! I can't even make Mr. Hat laugh like that! Finally, the Yellow Magician decides to pay them a visit, and more importantly, chat a bit. Trucy does in fact know him, as Valent Gramarye, though they haven't seen each other in 7 years. The two know each other through Valent's partner, Zach Gramarye, Trucy's biological father. And apparently, he's vanished from the stage, so to speak. In any case, Valent hasn't come just to see his former partner's daughter. He delivers a videotape of the Guitar Serenade, and the counter finally ticks up. Apollo realizes that Lamoureux's disappearing act was likely Valent's idea, and he agrees, but declines to explain how it happened. And this is a little bothersome. Trucy defends him, and Valent adds that the murder didn't occur during the Guitar Serenade, but still, Valent's lack of cooperation feels much more shoehorned than Olga's or even Wesley's. Apollo and Trucy go to the detention center, not that they're able to make any progress. After all, Maki can't speak any English, so why does Apollo's bracelet keep reacting? Without any way to break him, they head to the Coliseum and find Lamoureux backstage. She's apparently able to walk around even though she's blind, thanks to her hearing and other senses. I will restate that this case has a lot of unique things going on. While Lamoureux's blindness isn't a great plot twist per se, it is intriguing that she was supposedly able to witness the crime without literally seeing anything. Her amnesia also opens doors of intrigue. Lamoureux doesn't remember a time when she could see, and theorizes that Romain was after her. Apollo asks about her performance, but Valent told Lamoureux to keep quiet about the trick too. She asks Apollo about a strange device that she tripped over on the floor, and Trucy picks it up. It's a headset, and it's been in the hall since the day of the incident. Trucy decides to wear it for the time being. It's a small shame that she doesn't get any sprites to demarcate this. Apparently, every member of the concert staff and band was wearing them that night, though the range is only 30 feet. Apollo and Trucy return to the stage and run into Valent, who had started playing Lamoureux's song on the piano, rather elegantly I might add. He reveals that Clavier had asked for his help in making her disappear, a half point for the characters talking during the song this time. Apollo asks for details about his magical history, and Valent mentions his mentor, Magnifique Gramarye, took both Valent and Zach under his wing until a few years ago. Troupe Gramarye used to be so influential that even Apollo had heard of them as a kid, but Valent's been reduced to performing in parking lots. Trucy nonchalantly plays the piano, but one of the keys doesn't sound right. They find a trigger switch inside its back end, and go back to the crime scene to hear Emma and her snackoos. She's even more bothered than usual thanks to her testimony getting completely dismantled, but she does show the defense team a strange electronic device she found in the room. Apollo asks Emma about the switch, and... Say, Emma, you know that strange object you said you found? Oh, this? Let me try pressing the switch. Yo! It's on fire! Emma's device is on fire! What's the big idea? Emma analyzes the switch and concludes that its range is 30 feet, the same as the headset's. A diagram shows that 30 feet will be enough to cover part of the stage as well as the entire backstage. Darien greets the two with sarcasm as soon as they exit the Coliseum. He explains his alibi in simple terms. He was on the stage during the concert's third set when Apollo and Emma heard the pair of gunshots. Apparently, Clavier requested that Darien lie back and stop investigating for today. Apollo asks where the prosecutor's been, and Darien directs them to his office, insisting once more that he was on stage when the murder happened. The two arrive to a room that looks more like a rock star's dressing room than a prosecutor's office, and eavesdrop on Clavier, who's as furious as everyone else while on a call. Clavier notices them after he hangs up, and welcomes them to chat. He's been smushed by an even bigger mountain of trouble since the trial ended. To start, today's tabloids have painted the Guitar Serenade as the cause of Romain's death, and even the Virginian Daily Bugle has picked up on the story, though they didn't print the song lyrics. Clavier laments the burning of his guitar for the night of the crime. It was a gift from Lamoureux when they met in Virginia, and he had it shipped in a vacuum seal so that it wouldn't get ruined on the flight to America. He also shows Apollo that a familiar-looking electronic device was found inside the guitar after it was burnt. In addition, that phone call was concerning a strange oval-shaped replica. Even Clavier has no idea what it's a replica of, but supposedly it's related to whatever Romaine was searching for. Clavier mentions that Lammermoor might know more about the replica, and Apollo mentions the presence of two lighters. A brief conversation between the two of them follows. Apollo and Clavier realize that the two of them are unusually cooperative with each other. Clavier teases that Apollo may be a bit naive, but they acknowledge that each other is aiming to reach the truth as a lawyer. As a singer, Clavier dislikes the attention, which is a funny line but makes his friendliness stick. As I've mentioned, Clavier's personality and relationship to Apollo throughout this game is much less adversarial than previous games as prosecutors, and that's cool. Clavier doesn't need to lie or hide things from the defense, which makes it all the more strange that he hides facts like Lammermoor's blindness until the worst time for the defense. It's yet another great concept that's handled rather strangely, to say the least. It could be argued that Clavier is trying to train Apollo in a sense, but I don't see it that way. I'll discuss and discount that possibility more in the future, but for now, back to the current case. Emma meets Apollo and Trucy outside the Coliseum. Apparently, no one can find Lammermoor at all. The defense team searches the premises and find the stage to be pitch black. Trucy points out the guitar case. It's been closed, and a piece of clothing can be seen on the outside. The two open the case, revealing an unconscious Lammermoor stuffed inside. Fortunately, Lammermoor is alright. According to Emma, she was struck in the head, but of course she couldn't see her attacker. Lammermoor couldn't even hear who it was. They didn't speak and disguised their steps well. She'd overheard that the stage's electricity was out, so she ran there and hid in the case before falling asleep. The group reasons that, since she was hit on the head, someone tall must have done it, and it's pretty obvious who had the motive to. Apollo asks her about the replica from Clavier's office, and Lammermoor responds that it's of a Virginian cocoon. Taking any out of the country merits the death penalty in Virginian courts. Lammermoor doesn't know anything else, but Apollo knows someone who might, and asks her to come with him to the detention center. Apollo asks Maki if his vision is the only secret he's been hiding. Maki reacts, and Apollo shows him the cocoon replica, a bigger reaction. Finally, Maki talks through Lammermoor. Apparently, the cocoons can be used to make a cure for incuritis. That's all he can confirm though. When asked if he smuggled one into the country, he says he can't go back home. It's pretty obvious why. He's just about ready to talk about the case when...
This meeting's over.
Darian? What do you mean? Visiting hours aren't over yet? There's a call from Maki from the Virginian embassy. This meeting is over. Sorry. Just give us 5 more minutes. We can call them back after that. Sorry, no go. Come on, piano boy. We're leaving. Darian, wait. I never liked you. Either of you. Huh? Darn it, we were so close. He was about to tell us. Hey, Apollo. You didn't want us to hear what Maki had to say. Apollo! And there can be only one reason why. Why is everyone ignoring me? Oh, sorry, this is it. I know who I'm after now. It all happens tomorrow, in court. Again, this case is shown to take creative turns. Dare I say, this segment is the highlight of the case for me. The main theme of this investigation is that all the remaining twists are hidden in plain sight. From a story perspective, it should be obvious what the end goal is and what multiple characters' motives are. I greatly appreciate Darian arousing more and more suspicion from the moment Lammermoor accuses him in court. There are still plenty of questions that need answers though. How did Lammermoor get from one side of the stage to another during the show? What is the significance of the 2 igniters and the other technology strewn about the venue? How many lies are Lammermoor and Maki telling, and just what happened on the night of the crime? All will be revealed soon enough. Valent shows up in the defendant lobby, only to tell Trucy that he won't be revealing his trick in court. Because why would an old family friend be of any help? A bailiff explains that the trial has been slightly delayed as the judge is visiting the Chief Justice's son again. He hands Apollo a newspaper stating that the kid has incuritis. Your mind should be connecting the dots now, but this interaction feels a bit shoehorned in. Personally, I would have had the judge name the disease on the first trial day, but I suppose it's not this case's worst mistake. Clavier and the judge go over the end of yesterday's trial. The victim, Romaine Latouche, was revealed to be an Interpol agent, and Lammermoor claimed that she heard Darian's voice at the time of his murder. Clavier maintains that his bandmate has an alibi, as the crime happened while he was on stage. Since nobody new can testify to the court, the judge is just about ready to declare a verdict. But there is one person that hasn't been questioned. Not counting any extra band members. Although it's established that each of the acts had 5 parts, everyone relevant to the case has already shown up. Yet another missed opportunity. The witness is, of course, Maki Dobai, who hasn't spoken yet because he can't speak English. Lammermoor is called as his interpreter, as she's on his side anyway, and so shouldn't have a need to lie. This is the series' first time having 2 people on the stand at once, and I will say that it's used in a couple interesting ways here. Lammermoor doesn't just translate, sometimes she speaks for Maki, and, as we shall see, she lies for him. Maki's first defense is that, since her song's lyrics are in English, he couldn't have followed them. Apollo's bracelet reacts immediately, and he presses Maki on how he knew the crime followed the lyrics at all. Maki claims that he'd read about the lyrics in the Virginian Daily Bugle, but Apollo shows the copy he got from Clavier's office, sans any mention of the lyrics. Clavier confirms that the police didn't ask about the lyrics either. Lammermoor says that she told Maki the crime's relation to her song, but Apollo's bracelet reacts yet again. This time, Lammermoor is on the ropes, and Apollo gets her and Maki to admit the truth. Maki speaks English. Maki maintains that he didn't kill Romaine, but he was in the dressing room after the crime. When he heard Apollo and Emma nearby, he escaped the room through the air vent. There's not much else he can discuss related to the murder, and he doesn't wish to speak about the cocoon smuggling that Apollo wanted him to yesterday. The judge declares a recess. Maki elaborates in the defendant lobby that, while he was in the dressing room, he heard gunshots and fled through the air vent. A magician, we ought to know who, told him that the vent would lead backstage. The recess ends, and Apollo has an idea. Lammermoor was attacked yesterday, and the only thing that would give someone a motive to is her testimony. Lammermoor's testimony stays the same, however, and there's not much to glean from it. Apollo asks what she heard specifically, and she was able to make out just one phrase.
It's over. Press the switch, now.
Apollo shows the switch, which was found on stage, not in the dressing room. He argues that the voice was talking to someone on the stage, and the headsets prove that it was possible to relay such a command. There's no proof that the switch was on the stage at the time, and no information on what the switch is for, at least none that Clavier knows. Apollo pulls out the igniter, and Clavier recognizes it well enough. Apollo argues that the switch set off the igniter inside Clavier's guitar, by extension, arguing that the voice was heard during the guitar's serenade, meaning that the murder happened during Lammermoor's ballad, and not the third set. The judge isn't convinced. After all, the crime occurring during the second set would contradict the order of the song's lyrics. But what if that's the point? The killer could have manipulated the events to make it seem like the crime followed the song's lyrics specifically because they had an alibi for the concert's third set, but not the second. Clavier has a few objections. For one, the window Lammermoor insists she witnessed the crime through was closed. This is easy to turn around, though. The window she's been referring to was actually the air vent. But why would she be in the air vent? She claims that she was there during the performance, but can say no more. Given what Maki said earlier, it should be clear why she was traveling through the ducts. The song doesn't need to be shown again, but it shows that she was hidden from view during most of the song. Apollo shows the venue's diagram, as well as the music video a few more times, revealing the possibility that Lammermoor had a body double in Valent, and that she was in hiding in the ducts for the majority of her performance, with plenty of time to hear the crime. The fact that Lammermoor dropped the brooch through the vent proves that she was in the ducts for the first half of the song, while Valent was on stage. She was still singing in there, but the dressing room had a speaker loud enough to mask her above. It was hard to mask her shock upon hearing the gunshots, though, and the videos played once more to remind everyone that she missed one of her lyrics entirely. Sorry, the videos played twice more. Clavier notes that Lammermoor could still be lying to protect Maki, but agrees that it's finally time to question Darien. Given that I plan to cover all this case's twists at the end of the trial, I'll just comment on the gameplay here. Although it doesn't advance the story much per se, proving Maki and Lammermoor to be more suspicious in one moment and less suspicious the next is an entertaining and chaotic way to arrive at the current junction. Apollo isn't just refuting Clavier's objections, but to his own arguments, and even to the defendants and those of the witness who's trying to help him. Connecting the switch and igniter with Lammermoor's words is a neat way to turn the case around all at once, finally lending her credibility and giving Apollo a case. I'd also like to note that, for once, the court gives the defense a bit of a break. While Lammermoor's testimony can't be proven at this time, everyone all but assumes it's true in order to work out the show's magic trick and so on. Of course, break time is over, and the kid gloves are off. Darien certainly will not be nearly as agreeable as Lammermoor was, or even Maki. He hasn't even started testifying, and he's already testy with both Clavier and Apollo, and every single testimony of his will be using the Allegro theme. I talked about this during Emma's testimony, but I think this is the only game in which it happens, and apart from Kristoff's few testimonies, in fact he only testified once in Turnabout Trump, Darien is the only witness to exclusively use the game's Allegro theme. Speaking of Emma, Darian's argument is that she and Apollo heard gunshots during the third set. But Phoenix showed up in the defendant lobby to tell the defense about something she found, a set of used-up firecrackers with gunpowder residue. Darian rebuts that the noise couldn't have been planned, but Clavier brings up the headset from the hallway as evidence that Darian could have heard their footsteps while on stage. I'll briefly note that it's a bit annoying to have the relevant evidence shoved on Apollo immediately before he uses it, but I digress. Darian asks for more decisive evidence, and Apollo brings up the mixing board again. Oh boy, get ready to see the counter rise. Pleasure. Clavier refers to the mixing board too, and Darian's misplaying, and brings up the possibility that Darian's arm would have been sore from using the murder weapon. Darian laughs at these arguments. First of all, there's no decisive evidence, and second of all, he's got no motive. After all, Romaine hadn't been to the country before. But why did he come again? He was an Interpol agent, searching for Virginian cocoons. If Darian were involved in the cocoon smuggling, he'd have a very solid motive to kill. And the judge's hospital visits give Darian a great motive to want those cocoons. The Chief Justice's son has incuritis, and if anyone would be more likely to keep the deal secret than the detective, it'd be him. Again though, there's no proof. Besides, how would Darian get the cocoon over to America? That's also rather simple to answer, actually. Clavier's guitar was vacuum sealed in Virginia to preserve it, meaning... Are you saying that guitar was... With cocoons this small, it would have been very easy to use your guitar as a mule to smuggle a cocoon out of Virginia! Well, what? Which reminds me, Prosecutor Gavin, that guitar had some work done on it recently, right? Work? Good memory, Ed Forehead. Well, you know how guitars have a round hole in the front. It's called the sound hole. Well, they found something attached to the wood just inside the hole. A broken device of some sort. A broken device? Yes, this, in fact. An igniter? Exactly! Consider this if you will. What if that igniter wasn't the only thing that was attached inside your guitar? You mean... He means this, of course. There was a way to get a cocoon out of the country. They could use Icky Prosecutor Gavin's privileged guitar as the mule. And who better to do that than someone with access? Like a member of the band! Yo! Order! So the igniter was placed in there for a clear reason, it seems. It was a safety precaution! A precaution? Ed Forehead. At last it all comes together. Every strange thing that happened that day. Care to review? Maestro, the gentle sounds of Lemurer's ballad, if you please. First, my keys were stolen. A harmless misdemeanor, which forced me to break the lock on my guitar case. The key was stolen to retrieve the cocoon from the guitar. I see. But things didn't go so well. The smuggler wasn't counting on the car being wrapped. Only a member of the band could get near that case. Unwrapping the guitar would raise too many suspicions. Then the concert began. Right about this time, a very large problem presented itself to the smuggler. What's that? Mr. Latouche. Mr. Latouche, an undercover agent, was onto something. He would have known about the guitar. He'd only have to check the shipping records. So, Mr. Latouche tried to examine the guitar himself. If the cocoon were confiscated then, the gig would be up. The only thing left for the smuggler to do was to get rid of the whole lot. It's over. Press the switch, now. The guitar burst into flames, and the cocoon was lost. And then... Mr. Latouche died, with Lemureur there to witness it. There's your case. Darian's not done laughing. Darian didn't go to Virginia with Clavier after all. But someone else in this case has been there for most of his life. Who did he tell to press the switch? There's only one person who meets all the requirements of the accomplice. And that person is the defendant, Makito Bai! But Mr. Justice, he's your client! The defense attorney accusing his client. That's a new one. I assure you, no one is more unhappy about this than I. But I am here to defend him in the murder of Mr. Latouche. And I stand by my statement earlier that he is innocent of that particular crime.
Indeed, the defendant is Borginian. He does meet the basic requirements to be the accomplice. But what if it was, in fact, Lamador?
It couldn't have been.
Well, you seem sure of yourself.
The reason is electronic signals, Your Honor.
Electronic signals?
Recall that this remote only works to a range of 30 feet. Beyond that, it's useless.
Yes, that's true.
Now, think back to the testimony. When the shooter made his transmission, Lamador was in the air vent, right above the dressing room where the shooter stood. Let's look at the stage diagram. This is the area that the remote could reach from the air vent.
Well, looking at this, it seems that Lamador still could have done the deed.
No. When the shooter made that transmission, the stage was slightly different than shown here. It was in the middle of the guitar serenade. Part of the stage was raised. Prosecutor Gavin and the Lamador stand-in were in the air. They were on a tower, which happens to be 15 feet tall. In other words, the remote couldn't have worked from Lamador's position in the air vent.
Ah!
Well, Detective Crescend, what do you say to that? Your Honor, like every time before, Darien has a counter to Apollo's latest attack. He, again, really? Explains that Maki was playing the piano throughout the song. Another cut to the song is made, and Clavier makes an errant remark. The song sounds just a little different than it should, now that he's focused on it. During the second verse of the song, when Lamador heard Darien's voice, Maki was playing a tune so simple that he could have had a free hand to press the switch. It all makes sense, but there's no proof, no hard evidence. I'll finish off this case quickly, but let's just say I have some aversions to how this plays out. Maki still hasn't testified about the cocoon smuggling, and Apollo presses that, if he does, Darien will be found guilty. Darien tries to argue that Maki will be put to death for cocoon smuggling, but Apollo and Clavier turn that around, and claim that he'll be tried in America, whether for smuggling or the murder of an Interpol agent. Don't worry there. I'll get you out of the country. I'll set you up someplace. A hidden mansion. Real nice. You want a house made out of cool cookies or no? A house made out of pianos. Come on. Please. Don't talk! I know it's a semi-satirical video game, and I'm far from the first person to make this criticism, but Apollo shouldn't need to prove that Darien did anything. I literally looked up, do lawyers in Japan have to find the real criminal, and the burden of proof is supposedly on the prosecution to find a defendant guilty without any reasonable doubt there, just as in the United States. And I'm well aware that the satire of the legal system became much more pointed in this game and in the rest of this trilogy, and I'm extremely well aware that the ending of this case is meant to foreshadow the premise of the next. But I can't get past the fact that, in just about every case, it's circumstantial evidence that's able to pin the crime against the defendant, and it takes decisive evidence to prove anything about a witness's misdeeds. Maybe if there was a game with no explicit defendants, themed entirely around a series of investigations to corner the true culprit outside of court. In any case, the lack of proof, which I'm sure was done on purpose to coincide with the themes of this game, does make Darien just a bit less satisfying to take down. But I don't fault them for trying. As I've said numerous times now, Turnabout Serenade tries a lot of interesting things, and my verdict is that it happens to execute on most of them poorly. Apollo and Emma being all but witnesses to the crime? Hell yeah, that's a really cool angle to start the investigation on. It's a bit of a shame that Apollo and Emma's perspective doesn't matter that much, but so goes most first day testimony. Lamador being a witness that lies to protect the defendant is unique and handled well in my opinion, and that most of her actual account is a truth that happens to contradict the case's base assumptions is beautiful. Darien being named straight up by Lammermoor is a gem of a concept that puts him in the back of the player's mind for the entire second half of the case. The way he interacts with everyone cements this, and his combativeness in court does make him more fun to defeat, but his story is a bit underdeveloped. How did he get into contact with Maki, for instance? On the topic of plot holes, the argument to convict Maki has far too many. Even though he can see, and even though he can understand English, and even though he has a motive, which is only given by him after he's declared innocent, he couldn't have shot that gun without any injuries. There were multiple lines of dialogue referencing how hard it was to use the victim's weapon, and yet everyone assumes that a literal child would have been able to handle it so well that he only missed once? Again, it's not meant to be realistic, but there's no way a reasonable person would convict Maki. Some cases in real life do go without a murderer after all. That would have been an interesting angle to take this case. Apollo Reclavier or someone trying to push the case further along to find the real killer, even as it becomes more and more obvious that Maki is innocent. If something like that would have explained the continued prosecution of Maki, then I'd have been much more invested in the case. Or maybe the case would have been made even worse for it. It already treads a lot of experimental ground after all. One more thing. I really don't like that the judge's newspaper and firecrackers are given to Apollo so late in the trial. The firecrackers Phoenix gives literally right before the one time they're used, and Apollo could have easily found them with Emma during the investigation, even on day one. Moments like that, as well as a few instances where Apollo or Clavier figures some things out for the player, can make sense to speed things up and give the back and forth dialogue between the characters a bit more realism, but too much of it ruins player immersion and turns the visual novel from a game into a book. This will be relevant later. Everything will be relevant, in fact. It's time for the final case to begin. We'll see a criminal die, we'll see another revealed, and we'll even see the trial that cost Phoenix Wright his license to practice law. We will explore Phoenix's past and his present, and find out how the mysteries laid out in the past 3 cases connect to each other. We will also explore Japan's real legal history, and how its events shaped the making of this game. The last hand is about to be played. 7 years of crimes, lies, and betrayal, as well as 7 decades of judicial debate in Japan, have led to Turnabout Succession. We will soon learn how Phoenix lost his badge, how Trucy lost her father, how Apollo gained his bracelet, and how a young girl, swallowed up by a criminal mastermind, will regain hope. This has been Mike Thiente. Please like and subscribe. Trucy's been obsessed with Valent ever since the last trial, and Apollo's been trying to write about the case for the last 3 months as well. At this point, I know the feeling. It's good to take breaks now and then. Apollo decides to watch a bit of TV with Trucy, and sees an advertisement for Troop Gramarye's latest performance, and their first in 7 years. Phoenix comes in to tell Apollo about the secret mission he briefly referred to at the end of the last case. He's been working to introduce the jurist system, replacing the judge's verdict with the votes of 6 jurors, for Apollo's upcoming trial. If it sounds like he's springing the jurist system upon Apollo just as much as he is the case itself, that's because the game is, in a sense, propaganda. It's time for a history lesson. Despite its march toward imperialism, Japan introduced a jury system in the early 20th century, with the intent of showing the budding League of Nations that Japan had made democratic strides as a country. However, political pressure meant that this jury would not break at the empire's fabric more than necessary. The jury was limited to tax-paying males of 30 years or older, and only required for felony charges, excluding most major offenses against the government itself, such as treason. Defendants gave up their right to appeal when undergoing a jury trial, and, if they wished for a jury to hear a misdemeanor case, they had to pay for the jurors' travel expenses themselves. Jury verdicts were neither unanimous nor binding, nor even directly affecting the defendant's guilt in many cases, often instead related to the basic facts of the case. Jury trials were faster, averaging 2 days instead of 14 months for so-called bench trials without a jury, and acquittal rates were 5 times higher during its existence than in the years preceding the adoption of the current lay judge system. However, nearly all sides took issue with the imperial jury. Defendants often bore heavy cost, whether financial or through giving up some of their rights in exchange for a trial by jury. Counsel would at times recommend the bench over the jury because, while the chance for conviction was lower, the opportunity to appeal would drop to zero. Judges also argued to defendants to waive their right to a jury trial for this reason, in addition to conservative opinions that a judge's word was not to be intruded upon by commoners. Prosecutors disliked the higher acquittal rate that the system brought about, and complained that court preparation became more difficult and expensive for the state as well. Finally, the Second World War acted as a double whammy to seal the deal. Most people eligible for jury duty were actively performing military duty, and with the Axis powers ostracized from the rest of the developed world, Japan no longer had a reason to pretend that they held such democratic values. The system was formally suspended in 1943 and stayed that way despite Western intervention after the war because, according to the Ministry of Justice, the citizens of Japan had seen their empire, and thus its jury system, fail, and cultural differences meant that Japanese society had no need for such a system. Japan's 20th century jury came and went in just 25 years. Trucy has one more distraction for us, the Gramarye revival. She insists that they visit Sunshine Coliseum, and Phoenix agrees that Apollo should take her. Phoenix gives her a Recycle Your Plastics Day card, further highlighting the weird relationship between the two of them. The envelope has the seal of Troop Gramarye, but Phoenix sternly warns that Trucy is not allowed to open it. He also declines to tell Apollo about the case, and says he's not allowed to talk to anyone involved, but he does allow them to investigate the crime scene, if they can find it. For now, Apollo visits the detention center, but the client doesn't seem to be there. She's hiding behind a wall next to the glass pane, and much like Apollo's previous defendants, she does not say a word. Even Mr. Hat is powerless to invoke conversation. Just when they're about to leave, she talks, and gives Apollo a business card for Drew Studio, whatever that is. Apollo and Trucy arrive at the studio, and an outline marks a dead body indeed. They see a trio of canvases propped up, with one half finished, and Emma Skye, who reveals that the victim is the artist here, and that the defendant is his daughter. Drew Misham was an inverted illustrator who communicated entirely through his mailbox. His daughter, Vera Misham, was the only one allowed in the studio, apart from last night, where he accepted his first, and last, interview. Vera is apparently introverted too, only agreeing to be taken out of the studio if she'd be allowed to have her good luck charm. Vera made her father a cup of coffee at 9 p.m., and traces of poison were found in the mug's lip, but nowhere in the coffee. Vera herself has said that the interviewer didn't touch Drew's coffee at all. Apollo and Trucy investigate. They find a canvas behind a desk that looks just like the half-finished painting on one of the easels, and a red envelope in another desk that's been opened and sealed again. The letter is dated 7 years ago. Apollo asks Emma to help scientifically, and she starts by allowing them to spray for traces of atrocodine, the poison that Drew died by, elsewhere in the room. Only one other thing in the room gets a reaction, a 2x2-inch photo frame. Apollo asks about the red envelope, and Emma pulls out an X-ray machine. This is probably the most boring minigame thus far. Even on the DS, it's not fun to play, but the context in which it's used is exemplary. After 3.5 minutes, the contents make themselves clear, literally. It seems someone gave $100,000 to Drew for a commission 7 years ago, along with instructions to return a receipt using an enclosed stamp and envelope as soon as possible. There aren't any stamps or envelopes in the victim's room, apart from this one, so he likely followed through on this. Apollo asks for details on the reporter, and while she can't say too much, she gives Apollo a name in Spark Brushel, and lets slip that he's been trying to interview Valiant Gramarye. Apollo finally has a reason to return to Sunshine Coliseum, where he and Trucy are greeted enthusiastically by the Yellow Magician. He and Trucy lament the absence of his partner Zach, and bask in the excitement of his upcoming show, and talk about his mentor Magnify too. Valiant notes that no one has been able to practice Magnify's magic in 7 years because of intellectual property laws. He gave his magic's performance rights to Zach Gramarye, who disappeared 7 years ago. And after 7 years, missing people are considered dead. Without a will on Zach's part, Magnify's will had the rights go to Valiant. Apollo presents the pink envelope Phoenix gave Trucy earlier, and Valiant freaks out. The signature is that of Zach Gramarye himself, and Valiant all but demands to open it. Apollo doesn't let him, but I speak for everyone when I say that we're all even more intrigued as to its contents now. Apollo also asks about Spark, the journalist, and Valiant initially had Spark come to interview him about the show. However, he only wanted to ask Valiant about the Drew Misham case, and the magician remains so infuriated that he tears the reporter's business card to shreds. At least he mentions that Spark is at the detention center. Apollo and Trucy return to the detention center, and Spark seems to already know him, and bothers everyone in the room with his insinuatingly incendiary headlines. This case's main witness is given a bad rep for his personality, and I will give that he is a bit annoying to talk to. His awkward sprites and silly tics of saying that things are for the record, and making his inferences into headlines have turned many people off from him, but I don't think he's all that bad by Ace Attorney standards. He falls rather well in line with an overly haughty magician, a nearly mute painter's daughter, and an edgy scientific investigator, for instance. Regardless of anyone's opinion on him, Spark tells Apollo secondhand about a stolen painting featuring a giant peach. Apollo returns to Drew's studio and points out the hidden painting to Emma. When he claims that it was stolen, Emma reveals that Drew was a forger. Yet another person in this game who isn't entirely innocent. Phoenix forging evidence, Shadi and Olga trying to cheat at poker, Wonky and his family literally being the mafia, Pal Maractus committing malpractice, Wesley being a far too curious thief, Maki being a cocoon smuggler, and now Drew Misham being a forger. It's an intriguing trend, and it plays well into the game's slowly building theme that justice is far from perfect. Speaking of justice, Emma reveals that, as a forger, Drew was free to sketch whatever he'd like as long as the finished paintings lined up like his clients wanted. They use the X-ray machine to analyze the sketches and find...
What the heck is all this? I hesitate to ask why you're getting so excited. You sure your device isn't leaking some kind of strange radiation? Trucy, look at these 3 sketches! Do you notice anything? Ah! There! Now you're both white as sheets. What's going on? These sketches are of the 3 cases I worked on. What? The murder in the poker room at the Borscht Bowl Club. The dead man pulling the noodle stand. And then... the events that transpired during the Gaviners concert. What could it mean? How could he have drawn those things? And why? That's what I want to know. Wait, is Drew Misham your father? Give me a break! Does that seem even remotely possible to you? I'd never even heard of any Drew Misham before. I hadn't even seen a picture of him. But there were my cases, drawn on his canvas. Every single one of them. It couldn't have been a coincidence. Just who was this Drew Misham? And what did he have to do with me?
If the Misham Studio theme sounds familiar, try listening to the intro for Turnabout Trump again. That case's intro does feature a painter after all, and the foreshadowing doesn't stop there. Keen-eyed viewers will recognize more than a single face in this shot, for instance. This investigation segment also does a fantastic job to bring the game's intriguing plot points to a head. Trucy and Valent's relationship is expanded upon, and everyone's wonder about her birth father Zach is highlighted when he sees his handwriting on the pink envelope. Drew had been keeping up with Apollo despite being a total shut-in otherwise, and Spark insisted on interviewing Valent about his death for some reason. The letter from 7 years ago, with $100,000 in it, lines up just a bit too neatly with Zach's disappearance. Say, didn't something else happen 7 years ago? Something involving a certain long-standing character of this franchise? If you don't remember, the game and I will remind you soon enough, and there's still plenty that ought to make your mind race. According to a 2001 paper by Takashi Maruta, anti-jury sentiments came in 3 flavors. Some have said that the Japanese people, in their deference to and respect for authority, would rather have officially certified judges hand down criminal verdicts. Others have argued that the general citizenry, being used to such deference, regardless of whether they might agree with such authority, would not be fit to adjudicate trials due to a lack of experience or the proper mindset. Finally, the issue of cost has been brought up, that jury trials are more expensive than those without. Maruta disagrees with these points' relevance. While jurors can be biased, so too are judges human, and they are far from immune from bias themselves. One of the key arguments in favor of a jury, after all, is the idea that several people's biases will cancel each other out, so that they may arrive at an ultimately fair verdict after their deliberation. Due to their lack of trial experience, judges may indeed be better than jurors at fact-finding and analysis, but again, this does not make formalized judges infallible, and being slightly more fallible does not mean that jurors' capabilities are entirely compromised. In fact, while Japan declined to reinstitute a jury system after the Second World War, the Allied powers were able to convince Japan to adopt the Prosecutorial Review Commission, effectively a grand jury. Beginning in 1948, the PRC would investigate judicial decisions and make recommendations to legal officials. Japan's conviction rate has been so historically high that, Rather than a venue favoring the defense, the PRC would often look into the possibility that a rare not guilty verdict might be the result of corruption. The PRC's recommendations were not legally binding until it was revised, along with the creation of the late judge system in 2009, but it was still an influential body, according to Maruta and an analysis by Hiroshi Fukurai. As for the cost argument, Maruta retorted that judicial spending at the time overall was less than 1% of the country's budget, claiming that such expenditures are not so costly on the whole. I will note that the only citation for this source is the name of a supposed attorney Inamoto. Searching anything similar to Inamoto 1968 has yielded no relevant results. I have also been unable to find any statistics, past or present, on how much Japan has spent on either trials or the judicial branch in general. If anyone is able to provide sources and information on these fronts, I would greatly appreciate it. Back to the case, it's time for the first trial day. Vera is finally willing to talk about herself, even if she emotes only through sketches. The judge and Clavier begin by discussing the use of the juris system and briefly touch upon the poison before calling Spark Brushel to the stand. Apparently, even the tiniest amount of atroconine can kill someone. Spark claims that the only people around were himself, the victim, and the defendant. The judge decides to make for a little TV and notes that Spark could have been the one to poison Drew, before Apollo provides the actual cross-examination and asks about the poisoning. While the reporter initially theorizes that Vera poisoned her father's coffee, he reveals that he fell over as soon as his lips touched the cup. This wouldn't be too big of a contradiction were it not for the particular poison involved. Atroconine specifically doesn't react immediately. Its victims have around 15 minutes to live. If Vera had poisoned his coffee, Drew would have lived to drink it. This would blow the case wide open if it's all true, but Clavier presses Spark to settle this matter quickly for the sake of his story. It seems a little out of character for Clavier, and I mentioned during Turnabout Serenade that he acts similarly in order to keep suspicion on the defendant. However, I think that he just wants to find the truth to a fault, to explore the reality behind this game's crimes. Spark insists that Drew died right after he started to drink, and Clavier's begun to realize that this case is much darker than it looks. Spark testifies about the 15 minutes before he drank his coffee, and mentions that Drew was sealing a yellow envelope shut. Another contradiction pops up, however. The only envelope at the crime scene was red, and it's addressed to Drew Misham, not from. Spark's not done talking about the letter. He claims that Drew put the envelope into the box, and while the judge dismisses it as irrelevant, he asks the court to look at the contents of the red envelope. The letter, being from 7 years ago, makes Spark twitch enough that even the judge is able to perceive it. He testifies that he effectively blackmailed Drew concerning something that happened 7 years ago. The pieces ought to be coming together now. Apollo perceives the witness more thoroughly, and it's revealed to the court that Drew is a forger, which Spark already knew. He elaborates that Drew was even involved in forging evidence, and Apollo claims that someone from the underworld could have had reason to want him dead, but there's no proof. Spark claims that nothing left the studio after Drew died, apart from himself, but his recent testimony mentioned that the victim put a letter in his mailbox. So what? So, in order to send a letter, you need to lick a stamp. Drew could have licked a poisoned stamp and then started to drink his coffee, right as his time ran out. But there were no stamps at the scene whatsoever. In fact, there's only the absence of a stamp on a tiny frame doused with atroconine. If someone did want to kill Drew Misham, a poisoned stamp would be the perfect weapon, and the letter in the red envelope instructs him to use an enclosed stamp. But there's no proof, is there?
It's not nice to become a flower line, Clavier.
Emma gets the judge's permission to examine the physical letter, and there are stamp-shaped traces of atroconine on one of its pages. It's possible that Drew realized the stamp would have killed him and thus neglected to use it for 7 years, but if that's all true, why would he use it now? Maybe he didn't realize. Maybe the forger himself was a fake. Someone other than Drew Misham set the stamp aside. Someone other than Drew Misham was the real forger. The only person who it could be, the only other person living in the studio, is the defendant, Vera Misham. Fascinating. Arguments both for and against the jury system are multifold. While a jury of laypersons is capable of interpreting laws in ways that fit their community standards and handing down verdicts that the average citizen feels is fair, traditional setups force consistency and continuity between rulings. A jury means that every voice is heard, but if some of those voices would corrupt the law for their own benefit, a rigid legalistic approach becomes ideal. Following the Second World War, Japan's legal system had become so legalistic and bureaucratic that there was only one officialized law school in the nation. Several nationwide systems have been put in place to ensure uniformity among judicial systems. As of the late 2000s, just before the lay judge system was to be implemented, Japan only had one jurisdiction, with the same criminal laws applying to the whole of the country. To ensure that judges at all levels of the system are keen to follow judicial standard, Even prestigious members of the Secretariat, the governing body of the Supreme Court, would be assigned to lower courts. If a lower court's judge questions their own decision, they would often seek advice from the Secretariat, whose opinions were almost always followed. The Supreme Court had spent more than half a century opposing any interference to what it saw as its sacred duty, whether from the concept of a layperson's jury or from any dissenting judges within the judiciary itself. The 70s and 80s saw several decades-late acquittals of death row inmates, emblazoning calls for reform. The Supreme Court lightly entertained the idea, with studies of foreign jury systems and mock trials for citizens, but the greatest push for a jury, says Ingram Weber, legal scholar of the University of Pennsylvania, came thanks to economic turmoil. The Supreme Court was just one example of Japan's overly bureaucratic government, which the people blamed for the collapse of their economy heading into the 90s. Japan wanted more transparency and accessibility into the workings of their government, including their courts. By the end of the century, the Judicial System Reform Council was set in place, encouraging discussion on all judiciary matters, including the potential implementation of a jury system. The JSRC, made up of those in the legal profession, reasoned that lay people's participation was necessary to restore faith in the court system, and that such participation would require more efficient trials on the whole. Jury trials would give voice to the diversifying values and beliefs of the Japanese people as well. Some in the council even argued that career judges, being secluded from society at large due to their often elite backgrounds and time spent behind the bench, were unable to properly hand down decisions aligning with the values of their citizens. However, the Supreme Court did not wish to give all judicial control to a jury, and a compromise was reached. A mixed jury system, meant for use only in the most serious of cases, such as those involving the death penalty. Typically, such cases involve 6 laypeople and 3 professional judges, though other combinations, such as 4 laypeople and 1 judge, are meant for simpler trials. At least 1 professional and 1 lay judge must each subscribe to the overall majority opinion for it to become valid. In this way, there is a sort of balance between the bureaucracy and the public of Japan's courts, and there must be at least some agreement between long-standing officials and society at large. We shall discuss the ramifications of this system later. It is time to return to the case at hand. Apollo and Trucy regroup in the defendant lobby, along with Vera, the true forger behind her father, Drew Misham. Her backstory is pretty simple. Like a lot of characters in this game, they needed money, they needed hope. Drew saw that Vera had a talent for forging whatever he could ask of her, and she started taking orders at 12. Trucy asks about the sketches at the studio, and Vera explains that her father had been following the writing co-law offices, and was excited to hear that they had returned to the legal world. Vera starts to bite her nails as soon as she enters the courtroom, and stares intensely at Clavier as soon as she notices him. She does answer, however, that she was indeed the forger, shielded by the victim. Clavier asks her to testify about the red envelope, and she says that it's from her first work besides a painting. I think it's a huge missed opportunity to have Vera's talents be, minor spoilers, irrelevant to this case per se. She could have forged something to prove her own innocence, for instance. Back to what actually happened instead of what could have been, Apollo and Clavier ask about the murderer's stamp that came with the letter, and she stares at the prosecutor again before explaining that she kept it, not because she knew it was poisonous, but because it had a picture of her favorite magicians. Favorite magicians? Uh-oh.
Gramarye.
What's with Gavin?
Might I ask just one question of this witness? In your testimony just now, you stated this was your first work that was other than a painting. Please, tell me, what exactly did you make? Can I ask what? No! Answer the question! Now! Hey! Well, Prosecutor Gavin, you're usually not the one whose volume concerns me. Yes, it's unbecoming of me. I apologize. But I must know. Please, Miss Mission, tell me. It was a book. A single page in a book. A book! Please be more specific. It was a handwritten book. Like a diary. No! I don't know!
Evidently, Clavier knows much more about this girl's works than even he realized before now.
What's wrong with Prosecutor Gavin? He looks like he just saw a ghost. Miss Bisham, this book. Was there a picture of a silk hat on the back cover? Yes or no? How did you know? Prosecutor Gavin, the defendant is answering all of your questions. Stop badgering her. He's told you nothing, has he? Your soiled studied mentor! Nothing! Solid who? That's right! Who else? Daddy? He never told you about the trial 7 years ago. About how we came to lose his attorney's badge. It was a certain piece of evidence that decided his fate, you know. A certain diary. On the back, it bore the mark of a silk hat. What?! Phoenix Wright tossed out of the profession by false evidence. And the forger who made that evidence is this girl standing right in front of me! Vera, you must tell us. The evidence you made was used in a trial 7 years ago. Who asked Drew Misham, you, to forge that evidence? For all of our sakes, who was it? We only met once. You met the client. Well, who was it? It was... What's going on with Vera? She's staring at Prosecutor Gavin's face again. Yes, what? Is there something about me? I remember clearly. I remember who gave me the book, the diary. Who was it? Vera!
This case is proving to be delightfully complex, isn't it? Phoenix said that the defendant was almost certainly guilty, but he obviously has some connection to the victim, and so does Clavier. What was presented as a simple case with a single witness is ballooned into a 7-year saga, and much more is yet to be revealed. This case escalates itself brilliantly, from the beginning of the investigation to the end of this trial. First, artist Drew Misham is dead, and Vera Misham, his daughter, is the defendant. Bits and pieces are revealed throughout the investigation. Trucy's seemingly random pink envelope makes Valen talk about her father and his former partner, and the seemingly innocuous Gramarys later turn up as Vera's favorite magicians. The diary having a silk hat should clue you in that we're about to discover much more about their troupe, but I do wish to talk about the present just a bit more. Spark Brushell's involvement in the case also reveals itself to run deeper and deeper as things progress. From a random reporter to the one who performed Drew's interview, and it's revealed through the trial that even he knew about Drew's forgeries, and of a certain 7-year-old incident. Now that everything's been laid out, it should be pretty obvious what that 7-year secret of Drew's is, or rather, of Vera's. It's been hinted at since the very first case, but it's finally time to see just how Phoenix Wright lost his attorney's badge. Since the jurist system isn't going to loom over this trial in particular, I'd like to name several huge inspirations for me to make this video. One is NezumiVA, whose professional tier voice dubbing combined with wonderful video making skills have invigorated my fire to make a review as big as this is. She's far from the only such YouTuber I've watched, but her Race Attorney videos are the most in-depth reviews of each game I've watched. I was initially going to voice act the entire Apollo Justice Trilogy before editing any of it, but seeing the notification for her retrospective of this game inspired me to start this process almost immediately after finishing my dub of this game. I still haven't watched her video, as I don't wish to plagiarize her work. I intend to watch it once I've finished editing everything else, and if I feel it to be necessary, I'll include some sort of response at the end. Beyond Nezumi's work, there are many channels who've inspired me to take up voice acting, and Let's Playing in general. I watch very few of them nowadays, but shoutouts to Save Data, Tyranny's Let's Dub Project, The Game Grumps, The Runaway Guys, Radical Soda, and Pokemon Challenges. It's unlikely that this will be the last time I thank any of them. They have my eternal gratitude for showing the potential of playing and reviewing video games. Finally, the inspiration for me to make this review as quickly as I've been able to. The Ace Attorney Investigations Collection. It was announced as I was making weekly uploads, and at this rate I'm going to fan dub both games in full HD with story mode on as soon as I upload the full review of this game. Calls to action go burr. Make sure to click the links in the description to follow me both here and on Twitch, and discuss everything I do on my Discord server. Wow! Showdown time. I lost. It's only a game of poker. A game I've played for a long time, and only lost twice. Who was the first? The man I killed, of course. Well, it seems I found the partner I've been looking for all along. Over a game of cards? Why, yes, over a game of cards. That was how we first met. 7 years ago. Shadi Enigmar, a name which ought to be half familiar, shows up in the defendant lobby. A mysterious girl in an also familiar red outfit, calling the defendant her daddy, is excited that her first show is today, and she's just as excited to give Phoenix a scrap of paper that she got from someone in the hall. Phoenix notes that the paper looks like a diary page. Shadi notes that he changed attorneys just yesterday. Despite this, he assures with a boisterous laugh he will not be found guilty, to which the girl, whom he calls Trucy, agrees. While it's Phoenix's last trial, it's Clavier Gavin's first, and he's arguably more aggressive here than he ever is to Apollo. That's surely just to up the difficulty in the gameplay. Similarly to his appearance in Turnabout Serenade, I decided to give him a mix between his normal accent and his learned German, implying that he hadn't mastered his European influence just yet. He gets more German as the trial drags on. Watch the dub, please. Links in the description, and so on. Detective Dick Gumshoe is called to the stand, a long-standing character from the original trilogy. While he only has one testimony, it provides Phoenix with lots of information. Shadi's accused of killing his mentor, Magnifi Gramarye, who'd been in the hospital for over a year with just a few months to live, thanks to liver cancer and diabetes. In fact, an empty insulin syringe was found near the victim's body. Apparently, Magnifi sent Shadi, also known as Zach, a letter asking him to shoot one shot square in the forehead at 11:05 p.m. An IV bag would be given every half hour, hence the strange time. On to the cross-examination, its gameplay sticks out to me. Most of these segments require just one presentation of evidence, or maybe a press and then a present, but here, Phoenix has to press on two different statements, each providing even more information for the knowledge-starved attorney, and to then object. After one press, Phoenix looks at a photo of the scene, pointing out that a clown down in the room has a bullet hole as well, in its forehead no less. Phoenix is confident in his objectioning, a stark contrast to Apollo's reckless and bombastic behavior. His experience and wit from the past 3 games have carried him far, and they're on full display here. Asking about the guns used shows that the ballistic markings match the gun's type, and that the weapon is from one of Troop Gramarye's old magic tricks. Despite its size, it can only hold 1 bullet. Clavier and the detective initially argued that Zack could have shot both the clown doll and Magnifi, but now we know how impossible that would have been. If the pistol holds just 1 bullet, he couldn't have shot both targets. Phoenix has turned this case around in record time. Even new players should now realize this level of skill that Phoenix has, if they didn't realize it during Turnabout Trump. Clavier has another witness, but before he's called, the judge declares a recess, and Phoenix finally has time to speak with his client. The letter Magnifi wrote mentioned a reason Zack had to come, and he won't say what that reason was, but he does explain that, when he arrived, 2 pistols and a sleeping Magnifi were laid out in front of him. Supposedly, this letter was far from the first instance of blackmail on Magnifi's end. Zack used one of the pistols to shoot the clown, and put it in his pocket. He says that Magnifi woke up and the two chatted, but again, he won't say what about. It's time for the trial to resume. Clavier confirms that a bullet was found in the clown's head, with similar ballistic markings to the one from Magnifi's. He calls his witness, who is none other than... Perhaps we'll start by asking your name and occupation. Valant Gramarye, magician. And you're the decisive witness, are you? You can prove your fellow student your partner's guilt? Fate, the grand illusion, filled with traps and tricks. Wait, the shooting took place in the hospital after 11 o'clock at night. If you're a witness, does that mean you were there that late? If one were to deduce this logically, the conclusion is yes! Can I just say that Valant and Zack are hilarious characters? They're just so goofy, it almost excuses Valant being such a stickler about his magic in the previous case. Valant's story is similar to Zack's. He received a letter to come to the hospital, though his was scheduled for 11:20. Like Zack, he has no intention of saying why Magnifi was able to influence them to come, and he claims that he shot the clown, meaning that his mentor was already dead when he'd come in. Valant agrees that only 1 gun was present when he arrived, but Phoenix is quick to point out that the ballistic markings matched the pistol from the scene. Valant's on the ropes, but Clavier steps in. When the analyses of Magnifi's bullet was carried out, he didn't know there were 2 guns. Technically, the analysis only revealed the type of gun, and now, some brilliant writing. You said you'd verified the murder weapon. Which is why I'm apologizing to you now, quite sincerely on my dad.
Would you hold me accountable for a mistake made in my youth? That was just this morning. I am still young. And I might add, it wasn't really my fault. If the defendant had only admitted he took one pistol from the scene of the crime, we would not be having this present discussion now.
The writing and situational play in this case, by the way, is beautiful. Even though the player, Phoenix, has next to no information, he feels fully in control of the case compared to the novice Clavier. However, as information and contradictions are revealed, Clavier gets his feet wet with solving his own case's contradictions. He becomes more and more confident in himself as the trial progresses, as if he's begun to steer the argument to a destination of his own choosing. Allegro time. Valiant claims that he called a doctor, who specified the time of death as 11:10 p.m. Clavier rehashes that McAfee's IV was filled every half hour, and, since the bag was 2/3 full, it would have been 10 minutes past 11. Phoenix presses this idea, and Valiant gives thanks to his lucky color. I love that his color isn't mentioned, but it's pretty damn obvious at this point. Phoenix and the player ought to have enough experience to realize that it's yellow, and if they've looked at the photo of the crime for long enough, they should have realized that the IV in the bag is green. Valiant is shocked to see this, and Clavier shows that, in a clear bag, the liquid is yellow, but the blue bag in the victim's room give it that green tint. Valiant's really on the ropes now. The witness was confident and correct in saying that the IV liquid was yellow. But how did he know? He'd seen it before, on its own. The empty insulin syringe had been wiped down. It had been tampered with. Valiant could have easily used it to refill the IV bag and implicate his partner. Clavier is not done. For one, there's no proof that Valiant did anything with their syringe. More importantly though, Clavier has one final piece of evidence to prove his case. A diary. Oh no. If a feeling of dread hasn't set in yet, it will. Clavier flips to the last page of the diary, which claims that whether anything else is written depends on his hand, presumably referring to Zach's. A suspiciously obvious error comes after this page, but no more words. Either Phoenix gives up here, or he presents a single page in a book. I'm left with no choice but to show my own evidence. No choice indeed. We know what's about to happen. This trial was presented with no chance of victory, and yet Phoenix has pressed on. The player has pressed on. The game gives the player a sense of pervasive dread, quickly lets it fade as Phoenix's skill and experience carry him through the case, and brings it up again right at the end, like a horror game's jump scare. Phoenix shows the mysterious torn page, and explains that, since McAfee continued writing in the diary, he must have been alive after Zach left. Therefore, Valiant was the one who shot him. It's completely sound logic, and Clavier's final piece of evidence is refuted easily. Too easily. But wait! That's impossible! That old man couldn't have written that.
Objection!
Finally. That 5-second pause is the game's doing. 5 seconds of silence. You know what Phoenix has just done. Clavier certainly knows. Valiant's wording, not too dissimilar to Christoph Gavin's when Apollo presented the bloody ace, suggests that even he knows that this diary page shouldn't exist. Phoenix has no idea, and stands by his evidence. Clavier asks that the gallery and current witness be temporarily excused. He has a new witness to call, and it should be obvious who that is. Now let me just say that, while I love the execution of this trial scenes, including Drew's testimony, this is one of the stupidest ideas in the history of Ace Attorney. It's practically the opposite of Turnabout Serenade. For one, almost every prosecutor before this game has presented forged or misleading evidence multiple times or gotten witnesses to lie. In fact, Manfred von Karma, the main villain of the very first game, was proven to have fabricated evidence and only received a nebulous penalty, after which he continued prosecuting for 15 more years. Edgeworth was proven to have submitted forged evidence to rise from the ashes, but no action was taken against him. To be fair, it was proven right then that he didn't know himself. Franziska von Karma even took an illegal photo and deliberately influenced the judge with it in her first case against Phoenix. You may recall that I said Clavier has an eye for the truth above all else. It's a good thing he does, because the hypocrisy of Phoenix losing his badge here is just flat out silly. Again though, the writing of this trial is impeccable. Clavier was tipped off that the defense had forged evidence on its side, which beautifully explains why he forces Phoenix into playing on hard mode despite being a novice. The trial raises more questions than answers, what with McAfee getting both Zach and Valiant to play a game of life and death with him, and with Valiant so eager to frame Zach for the crime. These questions wouldn't be answered for another 7 years, but as far as the law is concerned, the defendant's guilt right now is without question at all. Then again, Zach did say a guilty verdict would be impossible. Just what did he mean by that? Though I deeply regret having to declare a verdict in this way,
This trial is over. You have the right to find a new attorney and make an appeal. However, this court must... Your Honor. Yes, Mr. Zack? There is one thing I wish to make clear. Today, in this courtroom, you cannot declare me guilty. It is impossible. I'm afraid the defendant is quite mistaken. I most certainly have the authority to declare a verdict on you. Except, tell me, how do you plan on announcing your verdict? When your defendant does not exist. Doesn't exist? What are you talking about? I am talking about this! Mr. Enigmar!
And we're back to amazing ideas paired with goofy writing this time. The use of the Grammary theme brings a lot of light to this dark trial, and it's such a shock that I struggle not to laugh every time it happens. If you can't tell, my feelings on this case go back and forth, much like Phoenix's last trial. Is this case written badly with great ideas, or does this game execute its lackluster concepts in exemplary fashion? I suppose the only way to know is to delve deeper. Soon enough, the Mason system will have Phoenix dig through both the past and the present to solve the mysteries of Magnifi's murder, NezumiVA's poisonings, and more. In the beginning of 2024, the Apollo Justice Trilogy released for modern platforms. Smartphone ports were made in 2016, but this was the first time that Apollo Justice, along with its subsequent games Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice, will be available on major consoles. The improved graphics and features are nice, most notably for my purposes the story mode. Instead of actually playing the game, potentially stumbling on which piece of evidence to present when, I let the visual novel progress on its own while I lent it my voice. It's a great option for those who don't like the mystery element of the series, or would rather just not get stuck for any reason, and I greatly applaud its accessibility. You can turn the mode on and off at will, and even change how quickly the game advances dialogue. However, story mode robs a player of more than just the in-game achievements. The game will only examine and present whatever will advance the case forward, and much of the game's witty dialogue lies in little Easter eggs or incorrect choices. Furthermore, part of the fun, I think, is being confused and sometimes not knowing where to go. The latter criticism is exactly why I'm bringing up story mode now, as it drastically affects the flow of the Mason system. The Mason system, as Phoenix describes it, is a game that the jurists are to play, depicting Phoenix's evidence gathering over the past 7 years. The past is 4 locations, as is the present, but the present day locations are closed off at first. You're meant to piece things together yourself as you travel back and forth, to the point that the first listed location, the detention center, requires information from the present day. I believe there's a particular order in which you're meant to play through the segment, but story mode is a machine built for efficiency. For the sake of keeping you, the viewers, in a bit of suspense, and to emulate the gameplay experience, I intend to go over the segment in the order of someone playing for the first time, with a few exceptions. So, I will start by visiting the detention center. The use of the original game's music is a great touch to remind us all that Phoenix is, indeed, in the past, and that it's his game for now. Phoenix visits Valiant, and the two exchange words aimed at each other's self-proclaimed innocence. Valiant claims that his partner's disappearance is as good as a signed confession, and seems more interested in the fact that Magnifi's performance rights are due to be his, now that Zack is out of the picture. Phoenix presses Valiant not about the murder, but about why Magnifi sent out those letters.
The trick up his sleeve? Ah! Perhaps you do not know. Know what? A great magician never reveals his secrets.
So what the hell are those? They're Psyche Locks. A parallel to Apollo's bracelet, Phoenix has a green Magatama, which allows him to, in effect, cross-examine witnesses during the investigation phase. There's not much time to explain though. Phoenix has an idea of what could have led to the troops' blackmail. He presents Magnifi's murder weapon, suggesting that it isn't the first time that someone was killed by its bullets. The quick draw shoot-'em was cancelled, with no public reason why. Did someone else fall victim to the troops' magic? And here's the genius of the Mason system. Phoenix doesn't have any proof. He can't proceed. But the player now has a lead. They need to search for someone else involved with the troop. Next is the defendant lobby. Phoenix is greeted by the bailiff, returning character Mike Meekins. He and Emma are both from Rise from the Ashes, though his goofy megahorn and raspy voice show that he was and is meant as comic relief. I'm a bit conflicted about their and Gumshoe's inclusion, to be honest. On the one hand, it's cool that Emma's personality has shifted as a result of her circumstances. She's more mature and sassy thanks to Phoenix's disbarment, and her extremely relatable inability to get the career she's wanted all her life. And it wouldn't matter much per se if Gumshoe and Meekins were replaced with new one-shot characters, especially with such short-lived appearances. But they didn't need to be brought back per se, and their inclusion reminds me of a problem I have with this game in general, which is a lack of characters. Minor spoilers, Meekins is the last person the game introduces, despite there being several more places to investigate. I am admittedly rather biased towards cases with lots of characters, like Turnabout Samurai and Rise from the Ashes though. The bailiff's psyche locks come from his embarrassment at what he saw, or rather didn't see, Zach Gramarye. He slips just enough for Phoenix to piece together that, instead of Zach, he saw Trucy in the defendant lobby. But how would he possibly confuse the two of them? They were wearing similar colored suits, but she is, for one, nowhere near as tall. But Trucy does have a way to make herself taller, doesn't she? Technically, Phoenix doesn't get this evidence until a bit later, but he explains that Trucy used her signature trick, the amazing Mr. Hat, to fool everyone. Zach fled the courtroom and turned to the corner, running to the closest defendant lobby. Meekins gave chase, and when he turned to the corner himself, he saw a tall, red-clad magician jazzing into the second lobby. But that red magician was Mr. Hat, being used by Trucy. Once Meekins followed her, Zach Gramarye escaped for real. So, just how did Phoenix know about Mr. Hat in the first place? Trucy told him, of course. 2 weeks after the trial, the two of them are talking in his office. She doesn't have any known family, but she's more than fine staying with Phoenix. She's written adorably well and gives the section some much needed levity. It's almost enough to make everyone forget that her father disappeared before everyone's eyes. Unsurprisingly, she's the one who suggested that the place be renamed to the Anything Agency, and shows off Mr. Hat as proof that she has magical talent. She also mentions that, along with her father, her mother has vanished too. She was also involved in Troop Gramarye's performances until someone made a mistake, she says. That might sound a bit familiar if you're not using story mode, of course. She gives Phoenix a pendant containing a picture of her, named Thalassa, another lead, along with the key to Meekins' psyche locks from earlier. One more stop before the present. Phoenix enters Drew's studio, and unease sets in almost immediately, as if he's being watched. Drew makes the excuse that he had to take up forging due to his failures as a traditional artist, and it's unclear how sorry he actually is. Phoenix isn't satisfied with his apologies, and whether they're enough for you is up to each person. I like that a lot. It gives the story some depth and players are allowed to interpret the story just a bit differently. Phoenix brings up the forged diary page, and Drew mentions that he didn't actually copy the page per se. He was tasked with writing in the same way as MagnaV, but his client didn't have the exact page he was to duplicate. Phoenix asks if he'd ever met the client, and psyche locks appear. Drew tries to distract him by exchanging words about what the heck psyche locks even are, but Phoenix is not amused. He doesn't know the client's name, but Phoenix is able to figure out what we already know. The real forger is Vera. Drew gives that the client came to the studio to talk with Vera, who was apparently happier than she had ever been. He also allows Phoenix to examine the desk, containing the fabled commemorative stamp and a gaudy bottle of nail polish. The stamp shows Zach and Valent, as well as a third, a very familiar lady. Asking Vera about the stamp gets her attention, and when Phoenix mentions the Gramaryes, she lights up. Her sweetness is light in a similar manner to Trucy's, again breaking up this case's misery with her earnest excitement. She doesn't generally go outside at all, thanks to an incident where she was almost kidnapped, but she did show interest in going to a museum about the Gramaryes. The notorious client gave her a good luck charm, which gave her the confidence to leave the studio. The client also sent her that stamp, as part of a letter her father received, and she framed the stamp because she thought it was a gift. About the second gift though, the good luck charm, she stays silent behind a pair of psyche locks. These will be tougher to crack than Drew's, and so the past stays in the past for now. To recap everything so far, Valent has asked Phoenix to provide evidence that someone was a victim of the quick draw shoot 'em, one of Troop Gramarye's signature acts that was cancelled a few years ago. The bailiff during Zach's trial, Mike Meekins, has realized along with Phoenix that Trucy helped her father escape the court thanks to Mr. Hat. Trucy's father is missing, and it's revealed through a conversation with her that her mother Thalassa is gone as well. And, at Drew's studio, Phoenix has learned that Vera is the real forger, who obtained a mysterious good luck charm from the mysterious client. It's only the halfway point, and so much has been learned, with even more that will shock you. Kristoff leaves Phoenix with a few cold words. The tension between them is palpable, even in so few sentences. A not-so-mysterious man and... did we really need question marks for him too? Greet Phoenix. The Silver Dawned man wishes to play poker, which was established long ago as Phoenix's new pastime. Phoenix is surprised that he recognizes him, which he shouldn't be. Isn't Phoenix famous as a poker player now? Minor plot hole aside, Phoenix takes a while but eventually recognizes his guest as well. After 7 years, Zach Gramarye has appeared. Much like his trial, we know what's about to happen, but before he dies, Phoenix takes this chance to ask him about everything we've covered thus far. This isn't the first time the two are set to have a game. Zach challenged Phoenix to play back then, and made his decision to have him as his attorney because of it. He notes that competition allows him to see a man's true face, their unmasked personality. Phoenix brings up Trucy and her ability to see people's thoughts, and Zach acknowledges that Trucy's power comes from her grandfather. However, when Phoenix asks him to elaborate, Zack laments that he had to leave his daughter, but says that he left because of what was at stake. He shows a familiar-looking diary page, signed by Magnify Gramarye, giving Zack the right to perform his magic. Are you kidding me? Phoenix is as upset as I am. Zack had the actual Turnabout page the whole time and never told Phoenix. He didn't really kill Magnify, did he? Zack is frankly an idiot. As I said before, this case is the polar opposite to Turnabout Serenade. Dumb ideas, masterfully written. Beyond all this truth-telling and continued secret hiding, he's brought Brushel, a notary, along with him to officially hand his performance rights to Trucy. Phoenix shows Thalassa's locket, but Zack refuses to talk. Brushel spills the beans though. Thalassa was Magnify's sole daughter. Zack turns the conversation back to poker. He's irrational to a fault, it seems, practically taunting Phoenix that he won't lose tonight. We know that he and Olga had planned on cheating together, but the context we now know about who he really was makes this frankly nonsensical. Another thing that makes only a bit of sense, to be brutal, is Zack's recognition of Kristoff. Should he recognize him? Yes, as Clavier Gavin. The two brothers look nearly identical, and Phoenix shouldn't be surprised that Zack remembers Gavin. Clavier was presumably one of the last people he saw before vanishing. Does Zack happen to know Kristoff? Yes, but Phoenix shouldn't necessarily assume that he's even aware of Clavier's brother's existence. After 7 years of not seeing either one, it's just as likely that they mistook one for the other anyway. In fact, I even mixed up the brothers' names when I wrote at the beginning of this section of the script! However, Phoenix's leap in logic proves itself to be true, and the game progresses to the prison Kristoff's been holed up in for the past 6 months. The whiplash between the worst and best dialogue in this game continues as Kristoff and Phoenix meet in a cell. Both are uneasy and terse with each other, yet dance around their desired topics like two peacocks. Phoenix brings up Zack's name, and Kristoff denies that the man he killed was anything other than Shadi Smith. Kristoff devilishly and delightfully parades that he killed Shadi just because he's an evil guy. Kristoff and Phoenix remind each other of the Gramarye trial, and both note that Kristoff was the only one who'd called for Phoenix's punishment to be lenient. The two have been friends, but neither has really trusted the other. On the one hand, I wish that this relationship could have been explored more, but on the other, you've probably noticed that a certain character has been all but left behind in this investigation. And then, one of the most harrowing moments in the series. Tell me why you did it. Persistent, aren't you? I came here because I remembered something. The night of our game. Zack Gramarye mentioned your name, Gavin. Ah, that reminds me. I saw a familiar face as I entered this restaurant. He did not seem to notice me, however. Gavin, I believe was his name. After that, he was killed, and I asked you to help me. Because I remembered your kindness back when everyone else had turned on me. I seem to be in a bit of trouble. Something like that. Dead. Someone hit him hard. Me? Please. The cops should be here any minute. I'm in your hands. Should it come to that. I have to know. Why did you kill Shadi Smith? No. Zack Gramarye. Whoa. I've never seen Cyclops like these. Dark, cold, full of despair. Can I even unlock these things? I appreciate that the player is forced to activate the sequence, even if it's clear you'll never break them. The nail bottle appearing afterward is so subtle, and yet when it appears it ought to immediately catch your eye. On that note, it's time to use that bottle of nail polish and unlock the rest of the past. Vera's good luck charm, of course, is the bottle of nail polish on her desk, and Kristoff Gavin was the person who gave it to her. It's elegant. It's crafted so perfectly. It's a twist that the player gets to figure out, rather than being told. It comes out of nowhere, but is executed unbelievably well. Vera doesn't even admit to it. Phoenix already knows. We know. Vera elaborates and says that he might be the devil. More specifically, she claims that she saw the devil's face when they talked, but doesn't remember the details. She sees the sadness in Phoenix's eyes. Anti-spoiler, no, she's not part of the Gramarye bloodline. I don't think that would have been a good idea, but these bits of dialogue do set up something fun for the final trial. More on that when it comes. Phoenix has amassed enough information to take on Valence locks too. The quick draw shoot'em took someone's life, and we ought to have a strong idea of whose that would be now. Trucy's mother has been missing for a while now, and she was part of their performances. Even still, so what if Zack's wife died? That's Zack's problem. So, what if she wasn't just Zack's wife? She was also Magnify's only daughter. The fragile glass of showmanship was pierced, and a rift swelled between them. Valent admits that she was the victim of an accident. They were practicing the trick, both Zack and himself firing at her when a bullet flew through Thalassa's body. Neither know whose bullet took her life, but both were subject to the whims of their mentor as a result. Valent strikes that Magnify's actions were themselves immortal, but no more information is given that could lead Phoenix to deduce his killer. Valent does, however, allude to Spark Brushel's appearance, giving Phoenix the idea to discuss matters with him in the present. A quick detour first, to the Sunshine Coliseum. Phoenix wants to speak to Valent, but the Yellow Magician is not interested. In fact, he's had to talk and talk to a press that's become more and more suspicious of him, caring less about his magic than his potential murder. So, of course, Phoenix and Spark are on the same page at least. The two know there's more to the story than even I've said. He mentions that Drew said he felt a constant unease, like he was being watched. The journalist / newsman / notary felt the same, and the two agree it is strange to say the least that Zack was killed right after he showed his face to the world. He also reveals that he was a friend of the Gramarye's before Thalassa's disappearance, to the point that he interviewed Zack just after the affair. He doesn't know exactly what happened to Thalassa, but he knows that Valent's in trouble thanks to that pink envelope, revealing that it isn't the first time he's lost to Zack. Both Zack and Valent were interested in Thalassa, and of course, she chose Zack. However, Thalassa had another husband before Zack, one whose name we won't learn in this game and who died while performing, and one with whom Thalassa had a second child. Even Brushel doesn't know where that one went, but he does let Phoenix borrow a photo of Thalassa from years gone by, sporting a pair of beautiful bracelets. She, along with Trucy and Magnify, all have the same power, and that power has to do with the Gramarye's eyes. Power that was given from Magnify to Thalassa, and Thalassa to Trucy. I have to know more about this power of Trucy's. It's like she can see right into people's minds. The first time I saw her do it, it blew mine. And after you were done having your mind blown, you took her to play cards with you. Gotta use the resource at hand, I always say. Yet I myself have no such power. But Trucy does. Why is that? Maybe Trucy got her power from her mother. Thalassa Gramarye? I will not speak of that. Thalassa is officially missing, correct? And I think I know why you don't want to talk about her.
Take that!
The three of you were a team once. Not that the entire country doesn't already know this. At your peak, you were the biggest stars around. Yet, there's another story behind the fame, one that not many know. Thalassa lost her life during a rehearsal. To you and Valent Gramarye's bullets. It was an accident. It wasn't me! How could I shoot my dear Thalassa? I'm sure Valent would say the same thing. Why, just like another murder I might mention. Damn you! Her eyes, I loved Thalassa's eyes. To think they could read my mind was frightening. Yet there was a warmth in them that felt like an embrace. She is dead, and Magnify Gramarye has joined her. So the only one with her power left now is Trucy? Mr. Zack, I do not know. I don't need any power to see through that one, buddy. So there's someone else, someone other than Trucy. Someone who inherited Thalassa's power. Ha! Ha! How would I know? My chances are slim. It would take a miracle to learn the truth. Or maybe one has already occurred. There is someone else with the power, and I know who.
Take that!
This boy? His name is, I forget, something weird. Who could he be? An attorney. Attorney? I noticed him when I went to visit a friend's law offices. So, what are we to make of this, oh great ex-attorney? You can show me pictures of strange boys all you like. But you could at least say something like, I'm this boy. I could use a laugh. Perhaps you wouldn't laugh if you knew the facts. This might not be 100% proof, but it's close. There's a link between this boy and Thalassa. Actually, it's more of a ring. A ring. Perhaps this will refresh your memory? I just so happen to have evidence showing this missing link. Actually, I know something. Your marriage to Thalassa was her second.
How did you know this?
Her first husband, he died a year after they were wed, yes?
He was a performer. They met when he joined us Grammarys as a guest in our show. After Thalassa wed him, she left the troupe for a while. And you say she had a child then?
I have a photograph of her here. I couldn't help notice what she was wearing when I first saw this. Those bracelets stand out.
They are a Grammary family heirloom.
This boy wears a bracelet just like the ones in the picture.
What? So, that's why?
Why what, Mr. Zack?
I took this photograph of Thalassa before she left us. When she returned, she wore only one bracelet.
I bet I know where that other one went.
She gave it to this boy, her son.
The Grammary's power is actually explained with a form of pseudoscience. The game mentions kinetic vision as the ability to perceive anything with full clarity when focusing, and that's how Apollo and Trucy have been able to pick up on witnesses' tells. Apollo's bracelet is temperature sensitive, and effectively squeezes his wrists whenever he tenses up. In turn, whenever Apollo's grammarific eyes see a witness's tension, he subconsciously becomes tense himself, and his bracelet therefore tells him when to focus. Apollo's power isn't one that needs to be explained in a world where Phoenix's magical Magatama and spirit mediums exist, but I think it's a pretty cool thing to describe nonetheless. As for the reveal that Apollo and Trucy are half-siblings, I don't mind it per se, but it has much more shock value than relevance. Trust me, there are other much more impactful twists for Apollo later on in the series. Phoenix never tells the two of them about their relationship, which is such a letdown that fans have used it as evidence that each game from this point on is purposefully spoiler-free. While there is no official statement from Capcom concerning this, and there are instances in later games that mention important plot aspects of previous ones, such as Phoenix's disbarment arc finishing up before Dual Destinies begins, each game in this trilogy is much more independent than the others, largely due, in my opinion, to a lack of recurring characters. For reference, Clavier shows up in one Dual Destinies case, and Apollo and Trucy are the only others from this game that appear at all, and their time as lawyer and assistant are cut far shorter, especially in Trucy's case. More than that, a point many people have made about this case, and this game in general, is that it's not really Apollo's. This is the longest segment of the game, with the bulk of the game's mysteries being solved, and Apollo doesn't take part of it, and is only mentioned as part of a largely irrelevant and arguably unnecessary plot twist. The game as a whole has revolved around Phoenix almost as much as Apollo, perhaps even more. Phoenix was the defendant and did a lot to take down Kristoff in the first case, his relationship with Emma and history with Clavier are explored in the second, and now he's been the player character for the majority of the finale. While I personally don't mind playing as Phoenix, I definitely understand people's grievances towards Apollo getting shafted, and I think it's a missed opportunity to have Apollo take the reins. The case is called Turnabout Succession after all, but it feels more like Phoenix is clutching the torch as hard as he can, rather than passing it on to Apollo. To be fair, the developers were supposedly given a directive to include Phoenix in the game somehow, and they certainly involved him in a way that makes sense. This case is greatly complicated, to the point that it arguably requires that someone as experienced as Phoenix to crack. Phoenix is shown throughout the game to be smarter than he lets on despite his new design and lack of badge, and the game telegraphs his involvement well, giving the player just enough information to warrant intrigue about Phoenix's history. That's a huge part of why Turnabout Trump is so well loved, and that intrigue is cashed into great success here. It's just a shame that Apollo Justice arguably isn't even the star of his debut game's finale. Zack recounts his final conversation with McAfee, and the two discuss Valant. Phoenix explains that Valant's innocence has come into question in the eyes of the public, and Zack is moved by this. Despite being framed for murder, he retains compassion for his former partner, and signs a false confession to the murder of McAfee. Phoenix knows just what to do, to finally solve the mystery of McAfee's magical murder.
Ask what you will, you'll get nothing from me. I'm as much a part of this after as you are now. I have to know what happened. For 7 long years, I have endured. Now, finally, the curtain lifts on my new golden age. All the miracles of all troop within my grasp. Sorry to do this, Valant. But right now, I need answers. I think I'll start by dropping a bomb. That should shake things up. Valant, I wouldn't be so sure about those miracles. Not as long as I have this.
Take that!
And what might that be? I see it bears the Grammary seal. I should have brought this to your attention sooner. But I didn't imagine you'd be planning your comeback quite so fast. What is this?
A document showing the true recipient of the performance rights to Magnifi's miracles.
What? Zach Gramarye, he wrote this? What? He passed everything to his daughter?
Trucy Enigmar. Actually, she's officially my daughter these days.
Preposterous! Zach is gone, vanished into the void.
This is the genuine article. Zach was alive when he wrote this. Both myself and the notary can testify to this.
Whoa! Why? Why does fate toy with me so? Why must my life be lived in thrall to the dead?
You're not the only one with that problem.
But he shot Magnifi. Yes, it was Zach. It was. And then he left, and my career as a magician fell into darkness.
Did you think there might be some way out of it? Say, if you could prove Zach Gramarye shot Magnifi. Was that why you testified?
Yes, my way out. It should have been my way out.
Well, it might not be too late, Mr. Valent. All you need is a way to prove your case. Who really killed Magnifi Gramarye? I believe I have the answer to your prayers right here. Zach Gramarye wrote one more thing before passing on.
But this is the confession!
In which he admits to the killing of Magnifi Gramarye. See? All according to your plan.
I am a magician by trade. Deception is my life's work. I fool the audience, give them a fleeting dream. Yet, it seems the table has turned. Now I am the audience, believing in the deceptions I have brought upon myself.
Zach wrote this right in front of me. After I explained your situation to him.
Alika, oh my god!
Valent finally admits that Zach wasn't the murderer. He also admits that, in a flash of passion, he wanted to kill Magnifi for the rights to his magic. But, he says, he didn't. He claims, in fact, that Magnifi was shot by Magnifi Gramarye himself. When Valent had entered the room, Zach had already won his performance rights, and Magnifi informed him of Zach's victory before committing suicide. That's when Valent decided to frame Zach for the crime. He agrees to turn himself in, and reminisces over the fact that Zach was alive, as well as her. This is one of my favorite scenes in the entire game, simply because it's never made 100% clear what happened in that hospital room. As Valent asks, can he truly be believed? It sounds like he's coming clean to Phoenix, but there's a delicious ambiguity in his confession. It's a small thing, and it doesn't matter either way, really, but that's why it's good. I'll say it again, this case and this game generate intrigue beautifully. With everything else solved, it's time to return to Kristoff's prison cell. But, Phoenix doesn't find himself able to open the black psyche locks. In fact, he doesn't find Kristoff at all. What he does find is a yellow envelope. The yellow envelope. The sender's Drew Misham. Finally, decisive evidence. He pulls out a bottle of Atrocrine spray, and the Gramarye stamp gets a solid reaction. He opens the envelope, sent from a pleading Drew Misham, and... What's this? A burglar in jail? Gavin. I didn't know you moonlighted in larceny, right? Gavin, there's something I have to ask you. Can I steal your stuff? The answer is no. My apologies, but there's not much I care to discuss. Vera Misham hasn't received her verdict yet. You follow me, Gavin? There are no known survivors of Atrocrine poisoning, but it never hurts to hope. Okay, I'll be leaving now then. Right, wait. Yeah, Gavin? Would you mind leaving that letter? It's private. Oh, sorry. Forgot I had it. Many thanks. Oh, I love every bit of dialogue between these two. Fortunately for Phoenix, the decal on his beanie is revealed to hide a video camera, recording everything he's learned over the past 7 years. I shall start with the obvious here. This entire investigation is one big plot hole. Several pieces of evidence from the present are used in the past. There's no denying this. There are some things Phoenix could have feasibly figured out in other ways, like Vera's nail polish being the good luck charm Kristoff gave her, or that Trucy was involved in the magic trick to let Zach escape. However, Phoenix is only made aware of, say, Thalas's first husband through a conversation with Brushnell that happened 6 months after Zach dies. And he certainly would have had no knowledge that she wears the same bracelets as Apollo's. Maybe he'd done some digging in the years between the Gramarye trial and the current case, and this game was set up for the efficiency presenting his knowledge rather than an accurate view of how exactly he learned all that he did. I'm honestly not sure how to feel about such an assessment, and I could go either way on how valid I think that idea is, but at face value, it's just a little discombobulated. That discombobulation in terms of the story is great for gameplay, however. While the game does telegraph most of the places the player must go and what they must present, as is the case in much of Ace Attorney's investigation sequences, you're meant to figure out the big picture on your own, and overall the Mason system feels more free even if the path to the truth is rather linear. In particular, the potential to get lost in any given set of psyche locks forces players to consider whether they have what they need or should backtrack and find evidence elsewhere. Personally, I think psyche locks are a much better gameplay mechanic than the bracelet, as you're effectively thrust into a mini-cross that you might not even be able to complete. The player is given the opportunity to explore in an adventure game. It's beautiful and elegant. The bracelet only shows up during trials in this game, and while it does get used during investigations in other games, the process is much simpler, often requiring only one piece of evidence to be presented, if at all. I do like the idea behind Apollo's bracelet, but I'll discuss that more during the next trial phase, I promise. On the topic of Apollo, I've mentioned that he's practically cast aside in the second half of this case. He was only mentioned by name once during the conversation with Zack, and the reveal of his power is almost certainly the least relevant in terms of actually solving either murder. It's bad enough that this case, and this game as a whole, are dominated by the past of Phoenix Wright, but even in their attempts to make Apollo relevant in passing, his plot twists might not even crack the top 5 of this case. Granted, that is largely due to how impactful the other twists are, and the half-sibling deal and explanation of the bracelet's functions are great in a vacuum. He simply gets overshadowed by everything else that's happened for the past 7 years. Alright, I believe that covers everything I've wanted to say about this portion of the game. It's been an incredibly long road to the truth, 37 paragraphs in fact, but you, the player, Phoenix, and Apollo have all the facts they need to put this case away once and for all. The final trial is about to begin, and the courtroom doors are opening. Legislation to introduce the lay judge system passed in 2004, with nearly 100% of the vote in the Diet, Japan's version of Congress. However, it was not implemented until 2009. Apollo Justice, Ace Attorney, arrived on Japanese shelves in 2007 and happened to sell quite well. It was the 29th best-selling game of 2007, reaching more than 500,000 DS consoles in its release year. However, it is unclear how much sales affected people's perception of the lay judge system. After all, it's only brought up in full in the 4th case, and even then it's only mentioned a few times. I can, however, reveal Japanese society's initial and current feelings about their jury system, and try to explain why it isn't used in future mainline Ace Attorney games. According to David T. Johnson, a sociology professor from the University of Hawaii, 4 in 5 Japanese adults showed disinterest in being a lay judge as of early 2009, and legal and government bodies alike resisted the change. However, the demand to see these trials play out was so great that he was unable to get a seat, and, fortunately for our purposes and his, the first few lay judge trials received massive media coverage. Many of the conservatives' fears seems to be unfounded. Turnout of those summoned for the first 2 trials was over 90%, the lay judges were inquisitive during the trials and talkative after, and, contrary to the trends of the 20th century jury, the cases ended with harsher sentencing than was considered normal for the defendant's circumstances. In 2019, the Supreme Court even cited surveys claiming that the vast majority of lay judges saw merit in their trial participation. However, this does not mean that everyone in Japan enjoys the idea. As per the same report, the Supreme Court admitted that the operation of the system is still in a developing stage, end quote. In other words, results aren't exactly what they'd like to say. Interest in being a lay judge petered rather quickly after its first few trials, as half of those summoned in 2009 declined duty for work-related or other personal reasons, and by 2019, that percentage had increased to 2/3. Estimates hover between 30 and 40% of people not showing up for screening at all, and this gives the enthusiasm rate of lay judges a new meaning. That those who are already interested in legal matters, and who have enough time on their hands, self-select to take part in trials, thereby muddying the premise that the lay judge system truly represents the feelings of Japanese society as a whole. As the years went on, similar problems to trials in pre-war Japan began to rear themselves. Lay judges have continued to vote for stricter punishments, sentencing defendants to capital punishment, i.e. the death penalty, 20% more often than professional judges, according to Japanese lawyer and professor Muraoka Keiichi. Trials ran too long for citizens to endure, so trials were encouraged to wrap up quickly, leading to what some have considered hasty rulings that fail to properly account for all evidence and relevant circumstances. All in all, Japan's conviction rate has remained high, and the very concept of a jury is evidently met with either aggression from either end, or ambivalence from the majority of Japanese citizens. I've learned a lot about Japan's legal system and history over the course of making this video, and if you would like me to research and share even more, please do say so, but I think it's about time to finish my review of the funny red-vested lawyer game. Before I do though, I'd like to theorize on why the jury system doesn't make a return in the mainline Ace Attorney games. As I've noted, Apollo Justice had the order to promote the lay judge system, and it did so rather shoddily in my opinion. Only one of the 4 cases mentions it, and it barely affected the case until the end. In a way, that's all but happened already. If you can guess which case I'm referring to, props to you. My guess is that the developers didn't want to shoehorn a jury into future games when the dynamic of the attorney, prosecutor, and judge had worked so well before, and higher-ups didn't want to continue endorsing a system that was quickly becoming controversial. I have heard that a jury of sorts is used and given much more involvement in the great Ace Attorney duology, but I have yet to play through any of that, so I'll hold my opinions. If you'd like to see that happen, you know what to do. Vera is alive, but she could die at any moment. The trial must end as soon as possible. Clavier's argument? That Vera poisoned herself out of guilt for killing her father. Apollo has another idea, though. He shows Vera's bottle of nail polish, and gets a slight reaction out of Clavier. The Mason system revealed the bottle's source, and Clavier slowly realizes whom Apollo was about to name.
What's this? Christoph Gavin?
Objection!
What's your game? My bro, there's no way he could do a thing like that. You should know that better than anyone else. Indeed. He is behind bars.
I know. However, that doesn't mean it was impossible to do what he did.
What?
Ask yourselves when he put the poison in the bottle. It could have been yesterday. It could have been a month ago. Maybe it was a year ago. Or perhaps it was 7 years ago.
But Christoph Gavin had no motive for killing this poor girl. It's simply inconceivable.
Prosecutor Gavin doesn't seem to think so. That face tells me one thing. Christoph Gavin's own younger brother doesn't find it inconceivable at all.
Well, Prosecutor Gavin, if you feel there is a clear and pressing need, then we may have to summon Christoph Gavin from jail as a special witness.
Fine. I've known for some time that an impenetrable darkness lurks at the bottom of this. A darkness that has swallowed even myself. Okay, the defense's wish is granted. Let prisoner Christoph Gavin take the stand! Every line of dialogue from Christoph oozes the feeling that he is better than everyone else in the room. I wish we could have seen more of his relationship with Apollo and Clavier, particularly his dark side of his. His transformation from Apollo's professional supervisor to everyone's chilling adversary is exemplary in its presentation. As an experienced lawyer, Christoph aims for the throat. He stoically says the same as Clavier, that Vera had killed her father, and then, in effect, herself. Apollo's bracelet reacts, and it should be obvious when to use it. Christoph tenses slightly as he dismisses the possibility that he poisoned Drew as well as the defendant, and a scar on his hand reveals the devil's face. This is the last use of the bracelet, and it's finally time to explain what I love about it. I've seen people complain that the bracelet is just a way to expose witnesses' lies without presenting evidence, and I agree. It's basically a Press 2.0, and that's the beauty of it. Calling witnesses out for how tense they are often draws out a few more words, giving Apollo room to prove his case. For instance, despite Christoph's demeanor, he argues with Apollo just enough to create an opportunity for Apollo to present the stamp, his means of poisoning Drew Misham. The concept of using superior sight and senses to expose witnesses also lines up well with the enhanced capabilities of the Nintendo DX, an effect that is sadly lost in the remakes. I've said it before, but this game absolutely nails its aesthetics, and it on the whole really feels like a solid upgrade from the original trilogy, especially when played on actual hardware. The stamp is a great point, but Christoph denies this with his signature coolness. He reminds all of Brushell's testimony, saying that Drew only happened to use that stamp because he had no other, that it was pure coincidence. Clavier objects, however. Rather than the defense's bluff, he calls his own brother out. Christoph's argument is nothing more than a distraction. Why does it matter when Drew licked that stamp, as long as he did eventually? Apollo did argue that the stamp could have been from 7 years ago, after all. It's a great exchange between all three characters, and solid logic on Clavier's part. But it is annoying that Apollo's own logic gets overshadowed here. In the first case, sure, tutorialize everything and have Phoenix take the reins. But now Phoenix is take over the investigation, and Clavier is beginning to usurp Apollo's role in the trial. It's bad for gameplay and worse for Apollo's character development. Christoph seems unfazed, sidestepping Clavier's work to ask what kind of motive he might have. Apollo reasons that, if he really had no reason to kill Drew, it would have been his first line of attack. It should be clear what that motive is. Apollo presents the diary page that cost Phoenix his badge. The same person who had that evidence made is the one who sent the missions the red letter with that deadly stamp. Phoenix Wright was the one who presented it 7 years ago, but it was never proven that Phoenix forged the page himself. Apollo brings up the record of Phoenix's final case, revealing to those in the present day that Phoenix got the diary page from a girl who herself got it from someone else. In addition, Phoenix and Zack did mention that he was assigned to the case just one day before the trial was to start. Somehow nobody ever brought this up before today, but I'll let that plot hole slide. Make headcanons as you wish, but this omission is never explained all that well. To be fair, it's not exceedingly relevant. Kristoff does not budge. He was never formally registered as Zack's attorney, as he was allegedly fired before the motion was filed. Clavier begs Apollo to press on though. He's all but furious. He absolutely needs Apollo to present some sort of evidence incriminating his brother. In fact, it's the first time he calls the attorney by his full name. Apollo blindly states his confidence, and Kristoff calls his bluff by making this the only section of the game which takes 4/5 of the life bar. Time to briefly touch on this mechanic. The very first game in the series had a 5-point life system, which was replaced with a life bar whose stakes could be raised in pivotal moments like this. Justice for All and Trials with Tribulations had multiple instances of instant game overs for presenting the wrong evidence, and while it did build tension in those times, game over used to mean restarting from the beginning of the chapter, or at least the player's last manual save. I believe that this redundant arcade-style punishment led to the lack of intense life bar drops like this. This is the only one worth more than 2 ticks, and it doesn't even result in an instant game over. The trilogy re-releases added autosave and instant continuing to alleviate these issues, and I think that's for the best. After all, the only punishment for failure is to replay through any examinations and plot twist the player now already knows, so it's just a waste of time. As far as I know, the new continue system has been in place since the series came to the 3DS. This is also the last time we'll see the life bar in this game, unfortunately. The amount of correct decisions the player must make is in the single digits, and that's just sad for a finale. The last trial segment of the previous game had more than 5 times as many decisions. To be fair, the Mason system was long and expansive, but the shortness of this trial and the lack of gameplay within it, as I've recently discussed, hamper the player's ability to connect with Apollo. The scope of this case's investigation was expanded so far beyond the murder at hand that the trial and Apollo's character were all but sacrificed for it. Apollo presents the yellow letter. Kristoff immediately objects. He says that it's impossible to have the letter, and Trucy realizes that it's shoddily handwritten by Phoenix. Kristoff recounts that Phoenix had come to his cell while he was away, and that he'd almost left with a very similar envelope. Kristoff, of course, denies that he received any mail from the victim, and calls Phoenix out for forging evidence yet again. Apollo's got more though. He brings to Kristoff's attention Phoenix's video camera, and Kristoff finally flinches, but he still throws the accusation in the trash on account of Phoenix's disgraced reputation, reasoning that the video itself is fake. Without any legitimate evidence against him, the judge is about to send Kristoff back to his cell when...
Objection!
Another thing that no one ever questioned. How did Clavier know about the forgery? It's simple.
I knew because you told me, Kristoff.
How did Kristoff know? The answer to that is obvious. Kristoff denies any involvement in the forgery, but he does admit that he was Zack Gramery's initial attorney. He visited his client in the detention center for a game of cards. When Kristoff lost, Zack fired him on the spot. Apollo and Trucy understand the truth, however. Zack used the competition to perceive Kristoff's true nature, the nature of a man who came to hate someone as disrespectful to him as Zack, and as someone as disrespectful to the law as Phoenix. Kristoff claims that everything went just as he'd wished, but Clavier and Apollo know he's wrong. He killed Shoddy Smith, real name Zack Gramery, because he'd been afraid of his very existence for 7 years. Trucy hides her emotion at Apollo's revelation, leaving him to explain the case. Kristoff knew that defending Zack would be an immense boon to his career, so he commissioned a piece of forged evidence. To secure that they'd keep his secret, he sent Drew a stamp which he was to lick after the trial, and gave the finger-biting Vera a bottle of lace nail polish, telling her to put it on whenever she'd go outside and be nervous. Quick tangent, I adore that the perceived mechanic doesn't just apply to Apollo. Phoenix is the one who points out Olga's habit to him for the first time. Trucy does the same with Wesley Stickler in the second case. The judge notices Brushell's suspicious reactions, Zack aims to see through his poker opponents, and Vera and Clavier notice each other's tells. It's a small thing, a few bits of dialogue here and there, but it does make the game a bit more cohesive. Still, twitches and conjecture mean nothing to the establishment of the law. Kristoff reaffirms that his victim's name was Shoddy Smith, and that the one on trial today is Vera Misham. Even if the truth would be clear to a layperson, the traditional legal system could not find him guilty. For, without a human element, without giving the people a chance to speak their voice and state their opinion...
Evidence is everything. There is nothing more.
I believe this discussion has reached its conclusion. Your Honor! Mr. Justice, you have performed admirably well for a novice attorney. I respect your partner, Phoenix Wright's determination as well.
However, without direct proof, you have nothing. Isn't that right, Clavier? Unfortunately, yes, Kristoff, you're right. That is, you would have been right until now.
What?
Did the news not reach your desk in solitary? The eyes of the nation are on this courtroom today. This is the trial case for a new judicial system. That's right. I totally forgotten. The juris system! Jurists, you say? The current judicial system has been deemed too closed off from society. This new system attempts to inject the wisdom of common citizens into the law.
Common citizens? Wisdom?
Is this some kind of a joke? What could we possibly gain by doing this? Entrusting our judicial system to a mindless, emotional mob of irrational mouth breathers? Common citizens have something called common sense. Common sense is not restricted by the law. Nonsense! There's only room for two in this court. Me and the law! Keep the riffraff out! Out, I say! They're not in the court, actually. They're watching everything by video camera.
How can you allow this? Incidentally, the one responsible for making this happen was Phoenix Wright. Phoenix Wright! So, everything was leading to this, of course. Right. I won't accept! I can't accept! This is no court! Law! The law is everything! Law is absolute! You legendary swine soiler courts! Kristoff, it's over. Clavier! The law is absolute. You can't be serious. What? Odd. I thought you spent your life looking for loopholes. The law isn't absolute. It's filled with contradictions. The law is the end product of many years of history, the fruit of human knowledge. Like a gem, polished to a gleam through trials and errors. It is this fruit we receive and pass on and face in our time. And it is always changing, growing. Nurturing it is our task as human beings. Except for you, Kristoff. You aren't changing. You've stopped. You're not needed anymore. I couldn't think of anything to say. Maybe because I still haven't seen enough. Maybe because your development was stunted throughout this game, and probably because the story had so much missed potential. In the simplest terms, I find that this game tried to juggle too many new ideas, and as a result, many aspects of the series had to be scrapped or changed. Honestly, I think the whole no decisive evidence thing was done better in Recipe for Turnabout, where Phoenix's own character, his infamous bluffing tactics, won him the trial. Not to mention, with logic that the player had to present evidence to support, rather than a plot device forced into the game by higher-ups from a character who was forced into the game by higher-ups. The game tried to inject Japanese politics, to build a multi-case plot, to have two main characters, and to fill the protagonist's backstory with plot twists and connections to the stories of their main characters. By the way, Lamiror is Thalassa, and she was one of the 6 jurors, and she regained her memory during the trial. The player could even make her vote guilty, and Vera dies in a bad ending if so. These additions are cute, but the game feels lacking in substance outside of these twists and turns. At times, it feels like the twists and politics in this game were shoehorned in to make things more viscerally intriguing, almost as if the details of the murder plots themselves were the last things they thought about, or worse, that the developers felt unconfident in their story and tacked on loosely connected, if not completely disjointed, pieces of information to pad the game out. I've detailed no shortage of grievances as to the things they could have done, but Turnabout Succession feels like a collection rather than a combination of strange ideas more often than not. Despite its flaws though, Turnabout Succession isn't strictly worse than other finale cases. Breaking from the mold of Ace Attorney isn't inherently a negative, especially for a game on a new system with a new protagonist and design philosophy. The case, this game, has done an overall decent job at juggling its myriad of responsibilities. While it flops in some areas, I cannot deny that there were a few external decisions that forced the developers off their ideal path, and that the game is still competent despite these obstacles is itself impressive. What the case lacks in foreshadowing, it makes up greatly in dramatic irony. Phoenix bringing up the jury system might have gotten your gears turning about how that would be relevant, particularly after the previous case's decisive witness. When Valent freaks out about the pink envelope, you have to wonder what's inside. Once you realized that Drew's the forger, your mind likely raced if you recalled why Phoenix no longer has his badge. Obviously you knew as soon as Phoenix's trial starts how it would end, and Zack's appearance, if you happen to recall Shiny Smith's, will get your gears turning even more. It's almost too obvious that Thalassa was a magician and Magnify's daughter, and Phoenix capturing everything on video ought to reaffirm that his word will seal Kristoff's fate, which is itself a delightful duel by proxy that spans Trump and, in this case, both. The case, the game in general, had to juggle themes of the changing real-life judiciary system, several revelations about the game's mysteries, and multiple characters seeking out the truth and others attempting to hide it in their own myriad of ways. I don't envy the developers' hardships. Hell, it's hard enough to write this script, let alone write an entire visual novel. And even if I feel that missteps were made, I have to commend them for their bravery in taking on this challenge. Apollo Justice Ace Attorney is a game that simultaneously does too much and too little for its own good, but you definitely can't fault those involved for trying to fit what they could into the game. Do I think they could have added more in certain areas? Absolutely. Do I think certain aspects of the game could have been eliminated or tweaked to great effect? Certainly. But in the end, this game does a lot of things right as well. To create any written work is a monumental task, let alone something as interactive as a video game. Tremendous effort went into this game, and while it's not my favorite Ace Attorney, it is indelibly far from being a bad game. Overall, my take on this game is that it was overly ambitious. People both within and outside of the development team wanted the fourth game to go in all sorts of directions, including nowhere, as series creator Shu Takumi himself has said. He wanted the series to conclude as a single trilogy, but too many people wanted it to be made, and each influence gave the game more and more ideas that had to be implemented. It feels like they tried to fit just about every idea they had into the game. That kind of ambition sometimes leads to some of the greatest moments in the series, such as the series' arguably greatest tutorial case. But an unfocused project can quickly fall apart, and the sheer number of ideas the game tried to pull off all at once almost certainly led to the unanswered questions and haphazard gameplay and characterization that plagued the back half of this game. I greatly admire Apollo Justice for existing. It was the opposite of Passion Project, but as far as reboots go, the team didn't play things safe at all. It's an original work of art, the kind of Vera would be honored to paint, and I'm glad that Apollo Justice's story is uniquely chaotic, even if it ranks low in my list of Ace Attorney entries overall. Not to mention that my opinions are far from absolute. Hell, one of my favorite games in the series, Ace Attorney Investigations, is often cited as the worst in the series. It has been years since I last played it, but I recall enjoying how well connected and deep the mysteries of that game go, covering a conspiracy that lasts for all 5 cases, not just its beginning and end. I'll be dubbing it live on my Twitch channel as soon as the remake releases, and if this video does well enough, I'd be honored to entertain with a review of Miles Edgeworth's adventures as well. For updates on such things, you can check out my Twitch and Discord in the description's links, and of course subscribe to this YouTube channel. Until next time...
Hold it!
Time for the reaction segment to NezumiVA's video on this game. Please do check it out in the description. It's about as long as mine, so I'm watching it in parts and writing my initial thoughts down after each gameplay segment. Seeing the video's intro, I already noticed similarities between our videos, both talking about Apollo Justice as a successor to the Phoenix Wright trilogy, though I do appreciate that she weaves in a bit of narrative on dual destinies and Spirit of Justice being part of Apollo's trilogy here. I didn't put much thought into my own intro, to be honest, wanting it to be quick and painless, so to speak. Alright, the housekeeping section's out of the way. It seems Nezumi's done a bit more research than I have, which is to be expected. I don't know how much she intends to touch upon the lay judge system, but I put a lot of time into learning about that in order to write its sections, and felt that information about the game's development wasn't as necessary per se. I do recall coming across info concerning the multitude of meetings before Apollo's name was decided upon and the media's mixed reactions to the game, but I wasn't sure how to incorporate such facts into my review. In all honesty, I wanted to keep my video's intro short because I'm not sure what to put in the early sections. While I've obviously seen videos by Nezumi and many others, it's my first time actually making one of this length, and I was scared not to push viewers away. Even considering that I wanted to incorporate my thoughts on stuff like the existence of the trilogy remake and the improved graphics into my review of the game itself, I feel like I loaded too much into the already bloated final case. More comments about the remakes probably could have been placed earlier, but to be frank, I've been concerned with getting this video done rather than getting it perfect. That's why this segment is just using my Punctuber self rather than any sort of gameplay. I'm also using text-to-speech thanks to an illness, which is probably that disease. Very fun. Briefly touching on Nezumi's use of the case intros in full, I initially wanted to do the same, but later felt that interstitching their visuals with my transitions between cases would make the video flow a bit more briskly, especially considering that this game's cases are more connected than previous games. This isn't to say that playing out the intros is a bad idea at all. It gives her video a movie-like feel. And no surprise here, Nezumi's voice work and audio quality are superior to mine. If anyone knows any good sources for voice lessons, please do say. Yeah, I'm at the first perceive bit now. First of all, Nezumi's breezing through this case so far, taking about half as much time as I have to reach this point, which almost certainly comes from knowing what to show when. I'll have to gain more experience in what to say so that I can be more brief. Secondly, this is the kind of thing I was talking about earlier. I should have elaborated on the mechanic here, rather than at the end of the game. I used the viewer's experience with perceiving to help explain what I liked about it, referencing other instances of it throughout the game, but I probably could have split up my talk about the mechanic. Now that I've watched through Turnabout Trump, I have to say, I'm a bit surprised that no lines of dialogue were directly ripped from the game. Much of my review of the case's second half is a direct use of my dub-in attempt to give the video a movie-like feel, as I mentioned earlier via conversations that I didn't feel able to summarize all that well. I personally believe that the little details of this game's writing are a big part of its charm, and I expected Nezumi to use similar tactics here. It's also interesting to see her review Kristofa's characterization much more thoroughly, while I talk about Olga's significance as a tutorial witness. It seems we picked similar but different things to mention at the end. She's making a lot of jokes in the Turnabout Corner section. I didn't go the comedy route, and I'm not all too sure why. I guess I just was thinking more about the case's base than making puns when I wrote the script. She also goes into much more detail about Emma's presence in Rise from the Ashes and the previous prosecutors' personalities than I did, which makes sense given that she's done reviews of the previous games as well. I aim to say as little as possible about the previous 3 games, and deciding whether to reference them a lot is yet another intriguing choice that I'm not sure I made correctly. It's amusing to notice the sheer frequency of parallels between how we talked about Turnabout Serenade, and that's probably because a lot of the points to be made are just that obvious. I agree conceptually with her take that overcomplication can be handled badly, and I do think that this case is a bit overly ambitious, but not to the same extent as Succession. I will also say that I completely failed to realize the contradictions she notes about La Miroir being in the air vent. It's the first time I've seen anyone point out how illogical that aspect is, and I'm a bit ashamed I didn't realize it myself. On to Succession, I greatly agree with Nezumi's conclusion that the lay judge system was shoehorned into the game, and also feel like I should have commented on Phoenix being able to hoist it despite being disbarred. I also agree that Brushell's perceived tell is a bit unfair, though we'll argue that La Miroir's shawl at least Patty Ally hides her gulp, so it should call attention in the same way that Maki's sunglasses do. Another thing I never realized is how unlikely it would be for nobody to hear the 2 gunshots at the hospital during Magnify's murder. Again, I'll refer to my complaint about the lack of witnesses in this game. And I don't think a single person has said they approve of the way Phoenix gets disbarred. Nezumi does make a convincing argument, though, that Zack's idiocy is both explainable and realistic. Considering that I enjoy Kristofa's shortcomings, I suppose I may have been a bit too hard on Zack. Wow. I suppose I was right to point out the lack of voice acting in this video, and a lot of our thoughts on Kristofa's relation to this game's themes line up. I've been surprised in general by how similar our reviews are, though our exact opinions and what we go into detail on diverge at several points. Alright, I've basically said everything I could at this point, to the extent that I literally can't speak this part. like, and subscribe, and join the Discord. And please do look out for my Ace Attorney investigations videos. Later.